Hero of the Otherworldly Castle. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 151, 1 Year Town. With the issuance of Yang Song's order to prepare for war, the Xia Kingdom, which had been developing for 2 years, seemed to be calm on the surface of the water, and was startled by a stone. In the military camp of Qianqi City, drums roared, and there were shouts everywhere. In less than a while, the guard brigade had assembled, and was ready to go. Li He brought his sister Li He to live in the central town. After personally participating in the construction of the entire town, they had a very strong sense of belonging to this home. So a year ago, when Li He was 19 years old, the king expanded the army, and he had no choice but to join the army. And his sister Li He was entrusted to Wu Mao and his sister to help take care of her. After more than a year of contact, he was still very relieved about these two brothers and sisters with the same fate. After Wu Mao patted his chest and promised that he would not treat Li He's sister badly, Li He left a generous settlement fee and followed other selected villagers into the military camp of Qianqi City, becoming a glorious spearman under the guard brigade. Li He had the idea of joining the army. Besides the propaganda of the propaganda staff, to protect the country and the country, he also saw the glorious moment of the army returning triumphantly. In addition, the central town is on the main traffic route. The troops stationed at Qianqian Pass often pass by here when they change their guard. Looking at the majestic armor, the majestic momentum, and the admiration of others, he had the idea of joining the army. In fact, there is a more realistic reason, that is, the salary of joining the army is very high. If he does not want to become a farmer who faces the lowest and backs the sky all his life, joining the army is a good choice. Li He finally chose to join the army for himself, and for his sister Li He. Brother Li, be careful on the road, Wu Zhaoqian said reluctantly to Li He in the crowd of people seeing him off. Li He was comforting his sister who was hugging him tightly and acting like a spoiled child. When he heard Wu Zhaoqian's words, he turned around and laughed. Zhaoqian, I know, thank you. Brother, can you not go? I can't bear to leave you. Li He raised her head from Li He's chest, staring at him with tearful eyes, her face full of reluctance. Li He touched his sister's head and comforted her. Sister, you are also a 17-year-old girl. If you do this, others will laugh at you. Be good at home, and don't be naughty. Humph, whoever wants to laugh can laugh, I don't care. Li He wrinkled his nose and acted like a spoiled child. Brother, if you leave, I will be alone. How can I live? As she spoke, she was about to cry again. Li He was also helpless. Li He made him feel like he was going to die. It was not a separation of life and death, but just going to serve in the army. Sister, I'm just going to join the army, and I'll still have a vacation. When I'm on vacation, I'll come back to see you right away, so don't cry. You're already so old. Be good. Finally, with the comfort of Li He and the help of the sensible Zhaoqian, he finally pulled Li He away from him. Brother, go with peace of mind. Sister Li He has me. We'll take care of her. As long as I have a bite to eat, she won't starve. Before leaving, Wu Mao patted his chest and promised, but accidentally said what was in his heart. When Li He heard Wu Mao's promise, his head was full of black lines. What does it mean to go with peace of mind? He wasn't going to die, so he rolled his eyes at Wu Mao helplessly and told the sensible Wu Zhaoqian. Sister Zhaoqian, I feel at ease with you around. I won't say anything about your brother. I'll trouble you in the future. Zhaoqian covered her mouth, looked at Wu Mao with a what's wrong with me expression, and laughed secretly, making the sad farewell just now a little easier. Well, Brother Li, it's not a problem, really, Wu Zhao said, pulling Li He, thinking that they would not see each other for a long time in the future, and he was still sad. Li He looked at his companions who had already set off, and someone waved to him, asking him to hurry up. He looked at the 3 people in front of him and said goodbye, I'm leaving, take care. After saying that, he looked at Li He deeply, and his resolute face could not help but show melancholy. He turned decisively and chased after his companions in front. Looking at Li He who was moving away, Li He couldn't help but cover his mouth. and squatted on the ground and cried bitterly. Wu Mao's funny temper was also restrained today. He didn't say much because he was afraid of saying the wrong thing. Wu Zhaoqian looked at Li, who was moving away, and her heart was empty. She couldn't help but take a few steps forward. With a completely different personality, she didn't know where she got the courage, and shouted loudly to Li, "He's back, brother Li, I'll wait for you." I don't know if Li heard it. I saw Li with his back to them, walking forward, raising his right hand high, and waving it freely. By now, Li has been in the army for a year. After a year of military life, his handsome appearance has become darker, but also more mature. He holds a spear in his hand, wears armor, stands straight like a javelin, and lines up with his comrades in the military camp, waiting for orders. Thinking about this year, he came to the military camp with his original passion. From a country boy who knows nothing, he has become a qualified soldier now. Some time ago, I received a letter that my sister has come of age and is now engaged to Wu Mao. I just wait for him to have a vacation and hold a wedding. When I go back, this is the common expectation of Li and Wu Mao. As for why his sister fell in love with Wu Mao, he also knew what was going on. Although he was in the military camp, he didn't know everything. Under Wu Mao's long-term care, Li gradually developed feelings in the long-term contact. It was normal, and at the beginning of last year, the king was married, and Zhaji Yuo also had an heir. I guess he gave up. Moreover, he followed the army to the Xianqian Pass for garrison, and he also passed through the central town several times. Every time he saw Li, Wu Mao and others, he felt that the world was impermanent, and was deeply touched by the changes of time. He originally had a few days off, but when he saw the generals and officers at all levels with serious faces on the general's platform, he knew that this vacation was probably gone. Sure enough, brothers, soldiers, there are enemies outside the pass coming to attack the Xianqian Pass. The king ordered our guard brigade to go to the Xianqian Pass immediately. It is our unshakable mission to defend our country. Tell this general, are you afraid? Zhang Wei was mobilizing troops on the general's platform. Facing his question, Li and other soldiers roared out the answer he wanted in unison. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Very good. Attention, all troops. Target Xianqian Pass. Set off. Zhang Wei nodded with satisfaction. He was a man who didn't talk much. He believed that such mobilization was enough. His soldiers would use practical actions to tell him, the king, and the people of the country, that they were proud of. Chapter 152. Entering the Natural Chasm. In the barracks, Li, like his comrades, was packing up his few personal belongings. Sun Yi, the team leader of their squad, came in, clapped his hands and said, "Listen to me, brothers. This time we are only defending the Xianqian Pass, and defending against the enemy's attack. You all know what the Xianqian Pass looks like, right?" "Yes, Captain." The soldiers all answered together. The long-term training made Li and his men stand at attention like a conditioned reflex, and obey the captain's instructions. Seeing the performance of his men, Sun Yi nodded with satisfaction and continued, "The Xianqian Pass is a place where not even a fly can fly over, so brothers, don't worry, there will be nothing wrong with this battle." As for obeying orders and obeying commands, he no longer needed to emphasize it again, as it had been ingrained into everyone's bones. Sun Yi was an ordinary soldier in the original guard camp. After several battles, he was promoted to a squad leader in this expansion. In this squad of 12, except for him, only the other deputy captain is a veteran, and the other 10 are all recruits. This is just an ordinary spearman squad, and it can have 2 veterans. Some arms, such as archers, except for the squad leader, all others are recruits, but there are also some sharp knife troops, which are composed of all veterans. Then brothers, hurry up and pack up, we are about to set off. Xiaoli, help me pack my things, the squadron leader has something to ask me. Sun Yi shouted to Li, who was closest to him, waved his hand, and went out again. He just came to inform his men that it was the task assigned by the squadron leader. "Li, are you afraid?" A comrade who was similar to him packed up his things and saw him packing the captain's things, so he came to help, asking in a low voice and looking at the deputy captain carefully. Hearing this, Li also glanced at the deputy captain. Seeing the look in his eyes, he nodded slightly and then whispered back, "Are you stupid? Asking these questions here? Be careful that you will be punished for disturbing the morale of the army." Of course I know, but I heard that many people died in the last expedition. It is normal for comrades to worry, but everyone is the same. It is the first time for them to go to the battlefield, and it is normal to be afraid. He turned around again and looked around, and found that this was not a place to talk. He hurriedly said, "Shut up, you kid, don't you see where you are? If you want to die, don't drag me. Okay, pack up quickly, pack up and leave immediately." He also had the mood of his comrades, but he was smart enough to know where this was, where and when to say some words, and when not to say them. This situation is basically happening everywhere in the military camp. Some people are afraid, but some people think this is an opportunity to make achievements. Not long after, the war drum sounded again. He was neatly dressed in armor, carrying a bag, with a short knife on his left waist and a water bottle on his right waist. He held the captain's bag on his left arm and a long spear in his right hand. He came to the parade ground again with his teammates. "Captain, yours." He handed the bag in his left hand to Sun Yi, who took it and put it on his back. He stood at the front of the team and lined up with everyone. When the war drum stopped, all the soldiers of the entire guard brigade had been on standby for a long time. Zhang Wei came to the stage again and listened to the report of the duty officer. "Report to the general. The whole brigade has been assembled." "Good. Return to the team." After Zhang Wei was promoted to brigade commander, his military rank was also upgraded to major general. Yushu, the former Major Sima, was also upgraded to colonel staff officer. Zhang Wei looked at the soldiers standing still in the brigade and waved to Yushu without saying much. Yushu stepped forward and said, "Distribute dry food." The militiamen of the rear security bureau had been on standby for a long time. After hearing the instructions, they carried some baskets on their shoulders and entered the formation, distributing dry food from left to right and from front to back. Each portion of dry food was wrapped in a waterproof craft paper, and each portion was enough for a soldier to eat for one meal. Now each soldier was distributed with 6 portions, enough for 2 days. He took the 6 craft paper bags from the militia, carefully put them into his bag, stood in place again, looked forward, and waited for the next instruction. These dry food were not the same. There were pork, mutton, beef, various dehydrated vegetables, cooked rice, fried noodles, and even some local special foods, enough for the soldiers to eat well. These dry rations are the latest achievements of the Rear Protection Bureau in the past 2 years. According to Yang Song's instructions, a special military ration factory was experimentally established to produce various dry rations, but the shelf life is not long, and they are generally made and distributed immediately. In order to save time and maximize the use of military rations, Yang Ren is also asking people to develop tin cans with a longer shelf life, but it has not been successful yet. The main problem is that the seal is not tight enough. These dry rations are not for everyone to eat on the road, but for emergency situations when logistics support cannot keep up, or other situations. They are used as backup. Without the order of the officers, the soldiers cannot eat casually. After the dry rations were distributed, Zhang Wei waved his hand again and ordered loudly and skillfully, "Let's go." The rear team of the entire brigade became the front team, and they came out of the barracks in an orderly manner, lined up in a long snake formation, and marched towards the northern natural trench pass. Along the way, every time they rested, the people of the Rear Protection Bureau had already prepared supplies, so that the soldiers could eat directly after they stopped. Every night, there would be a small town waiting for them ahead, providing a place for the soldiers to rest. In this way, the whole brigade only needed to rush forward with peace of mind. The marching speed of 50 kilometers a day was still very fast. The distance from Shianqi City to Shianqian Pass was only about 200 kilometers. On the 4th day, the guard brigade reached its destination and stationed in Shianqian Pass. A total of 3 towns were built on the passage from Shianqi City to Shianqian Pass. In addition to the central town in the middle, the one next to Shianqian Pass was named Changdao Town, and the one next to Shianqi City was named Xiadao Town. Since the construction of these 3 towns, the army's marching speed has been accelerated. Otherwise, it is normal to march 30th to 40 kilometers in the wild in a day. In this era, the army spent most of its time on the march when marching and fighting, and the real fighting time was only 1 or 2 days. Just like the last time D. King led the infantry brigade to attack the 4 territories outside the pass, there were only 4 battles in the past month, each lasting less than a day, and the shortest one lasted only a few minutes. So in order to connect the Cheyenne Pass faster, Yang Song built 3 small towns in the passage. With these 3 small towns, the army will save at least 1 day. You know, speed is life. This 1 day is often enough to change the situation. For example, now, the Guard Brigade arrives at the Cheyenne Pass 1 day earlier, and there is 1 more day to deploy defenses. Chapter 153, Get Ready. After arriving at Cheyenne Pass, Lee felt a little bit sorry. On the way, they rested for a night in the military camp or the military station outside the central town. Except for some militiamen guarding the military station, they didn't see any other familiar people. Even the next day, under the order of the general, they left quietly in order not to disturb the people. This situation of passing by the door, but not being able to enter, made him very emotional. Fortunately, how could the people of the town not know that such a large army came to the town? So the next day, he still found his sister and her group in the crowd beside the road. From their appearance, they seemed to be looking for him. But the army has discipline, and he couldn't say hello, so he could only follow the team and continue to move forward. Fortunately, when he was about to turn his back to them, the other party found him. Looking at Lee's excitedly waving hands, he could only use his eyes and a slight nod to indicate that he had seen them. Fortunately, he was a spearman, not a heavy infantryman, and did not cover his face with a mask. Lee was lying on the bed in the camp inside Cheyenne Pass, tossing and turning for a long time, unable to sleep, thinking about the relatives he saw yesterday morning. Lee has become more beautiful and more stable. If it was before, she might have rushed up to him, but now she just waved at him and gently called brother. If he hadn't looked carefully and clearly saw Lee's mouth shape, he might have missed this hard-earned greeting. Thinking of Wu Mao's dark face and resolute eyes, it seemed that he was promising him something, as if he had grown up in an instant and looked like a man. And the last person he thought of was Wu Ziokian. Yesterday morning, Ziokian accompanied Lee, arm in arm, and her expression was no worse than Lee's. She also waved at him and shouted brotherly. Alas. Lee let out a long sigh. Since ancient times, it has been the most difficult to repay the favor of a beautiful woman. Lee, why are you not sleeping at night? What are you sighing about? I talked to you these 2 days, but you ignored me. Are you worried about something? The comrade who slept on the upper bunk was awakened by his turning over, or rather, he was not asleep either. Seeing that Lee looked worried, he started talking to him in a low voice. Lee sighed again, turned over again, and ignored his comrade. Hey, Lee, who was the one who greeted you yesterday morning? Don't deny it, I saw it all. By the way, it seems that you used to live in that town, right? The comrade waited for a while, and seeing that Lee did not respond, he asked directly what he had been wanting to ask. Although Lee usually got along well with everyone, he would keep silent once talking about his family matters. Therefore, his comrades in the same team knew nothing except that he was from the central town. In the past, when passing through the central town, Lee always behaved perfectly. This time, he finally caught his tail, so how could his comrades let him go? Luoan, please stop asking. I'm very annoyed now. Lee was annoyed by the question, and had to reply. Ahem, aren't you too tired? If not, go stand guard. You'll be busy tomorrow. Sun Yi had been waiting for Lee's answer. He also wanted to know what the relationship between the two beauties and Lee was. He didn't expect Lee to be so stubborn. He didn't say anything. He had to speak up to indicate that he hadn't slept yet. In fact, the other comrades didn't sleep either. They had come to the front line, so how could they sleep peacefully? They all held their breath and kept silent, waiting for Lee's self-explosion. Who knew that the captain had spoken now, so they all made a hush sound, turned over and went to sleep quietly, while Luoan, who was on the upper bunk, was already snoring at this time. After a while, the whole barracks was filled with the sound of deep sleep. Everyone didn't sleep just now because they felt that they were still afraid and uneasy alone, but they also knew the responsibilities they were carrying and knew that they should stand up at this time. With all kinds of complicated emotions, how could they sleep? But they found that there were people who were more upset than themselves inside. They immediately diverted their attention. Finally, when they saw that there was no good show to listen to, they relaxed their hearts and the fatigue from the march suddenly surged up, and they soon fell asleep. If he knew the psychological activities of his comrades, he would probably pick a fight with them, but now, he had fallen asleep without realizing it. On the other side, after Zhang Wei met with Deking, they discussed the defense of the pass and said truthfully, General D, Staff Officer Lu, let's fight the enemy together this time. General Zhang said it well. There are many enemies this time. Only if we fight the enemy together can we live up to the trust of the king. Lu Su stroked his beard and continued with a look of approval. Deking also nodded and said, Qian Pass has a dangerous terrain and 2 city walls. We have such an advantage that no matter how many enemies there are, they can't pass through here. In addition, they have more than 100 artillery pieces. However, Deking knew that the other side only had a battalion of 27 city defense artillery pieces, which were installed on the city wall of Qian Pass all year round, so he didn't mention it. Even though Zhang Wei's guard brigade was expanded to 3,500 people, it actually still had no artillery. Although there was a battalion of 27 city defense artillery pieces, they were too heavy and were always placed on the city wall. Even when changing guards, they were not moved away. After their discussion, all the artillery pieces of the 2 brigades were installed on the 2 city walls to serve as heavy weapons for defending the city. Because all the soldiers were stationed on the 2 1-kilometer long city walls, there were only 3 soldiers per meter on average, and the soldiers stationed on the city walls could not be cavalry, but only infantry. So without the support of artillery, the 2 city walls of Qian Pass could not be full, so how could they defend? Fortunately, there are militias to supplement. As for the 2 brigades, there are about 2,000 cavalrymen in total. In addition to defending the city walls when necessary, they are also prepared to serve as a spearhead force for counterattacks. Qian Pass has been prepared for defense, and Yang Song of Qianqi City is also preparing for a counterattack. He ordered Yang Zhen of the military bureau to mobilize 20,000 militiamen not only to defend Qian Pass, but also to prepare for a counterattack after repelling the enemy. Because just transporting supplies and defending the city walls, 10,000 militiamen are enough. So this time Yang Song is determined to completely occupy this coastal basin outside the pass. Moreover, to the north of the Shangdao territory, there is also a passage similar to the Qian Pass. According to intelligence, the successive lords of Shangdao territory built a fortress on this trade route in order to prevent the powerful lords in the north from invading them. The location of the fortress is like the wall of Qian Pass. It is also built in a dangerous place on the trade route. The number of walls is 1 before and after the fortress. They called this fortress the Hatanteohe Fortress, and the name of the mountain range is also the Hatanteohe Mountain Range. Ding. System tasks updated. Mainline task 1, phase 2 released. Phase 2, expand and become powerful. Task reward, 5,000 talents of all kinds. Ding. System tasks updated. Mainline task 2, phase 2 released. Phase 2, dominate one side. Task reward, 1 standard division. Yang Song had just made up his mind to fight back when he heard that the system tasks that had been silent for several years had been updated. Could this be the correct way to open the system? Chapter 154, 7 Leaders United. The warriors at the Qian Pass were ready for the battle, and the coalition forces outside the pass had also assembled. Just as Chen Ping had expected, the coalition forces' final gathering place was in Beer City. However, all the lords stayed in the rear of Shangdao City, holding banquets every day, as if the upcoming battle had nothing to do with them. Sir Mike, we have sent out our own knights for this war, and assembled such a large army. I believe victory should be ours. Cassie Cade's fat body seemed to move over. Mike raised his glass and saluted the other party, saying calmly, that's for sure. 50,000 troops, such a large army, even the central territories in the north, are no more than this. How could we lose? In their discussion, the spoils after the victory were divided according to the number of troops dispatched. The more troops they sent, the more they would get in the end. The reason why these people were so united was not for revenge, but for practical interests. All along, they thought that they were at the southernmost part of the continent, that their territory would only be so big, and that their titles would never rise, so they lost their enterprising spirit. Only when they were bored, they would make an appointment to fight. They would be happy if they won, and sad if they lost. For these lords, war was more of a game. But now it is different. Since they knew that there was still a vast land south of the Olo Mountains, Cheyenne Mountains, their little thoughts began to overflow. However, due to the convention, they could not do it, but the territory opposite the Olo Mountains seemed to be unaware of the convention and actually did something extraordinary. When these dignitaries heard the news, they were so happy in their hearts. This was a rare opportunity that only comes once in 1,000 years. Therefore, now they have a perfect excuse. Standing at the absolute height of righteousness and sending troops to occupy new lands will leave others speechless. As for whether they can win, it is precisely because they know how powerful the other party is that they will make preparations and only unite now. According to the intelligence collected, the Zaya Kingdom territory in the south should not have many troops. There were not many troops sent over twice, and it is estimated that there are only 10,000 at most. They made this estimate by taking into account the militia of Zaya country, otherwise the number would be even smaller. The equipment is very advanced, and there are unknown long-range attack weapons that can explode, catch fire, and launch a large iron ball. But all these combined cannot stop their idea of attacking. After all, they have 50,000 troops. In their opinion, with so many people, one person can drown the enemy with a spit. As for their own casualties, they have never considered it. Anyway, they are just untouchables. No matter how many die, they will die in a few years. As long as the goal is achieved, the fate of the untouchables does not matter. That's right, this lord has sent out 12,000 troops. Even the gatekeepers have been sent out. How could we lose? Charlie Quill came over with bare arms, holding a large wooden wine glass in one hand and a piece of meat in the other, eating and drinking. Sir Charles' brave warriors are unstoppable to begin with, and now he has sent out so many of them. Unlike me, I can only spend money to hire useless mercenaries, which only add up to 18,000 people. Cassie Cave was smiling all the time, and it was not known whether it was fake or because there was too much fat on his face. Mike listened to the two people showing off their military strength, but he didn't feel anything. He only sent out 15,000 people, which was exactly between the other two. Just as Cassie said, although his army was large, the quality was not good, while Charles' army was small but powerful, and Mike's army was exactly between the two, not only in quantity, but also in quality. So in the end, it was decided that their armies would be calculated as 15,000 people, and the spoils would each occupy 3 layers, and the last layer would be divided by the other 4 small territories. As for the distribution of the remaining layer of spoils, in addition to looking good for face, Mike also fought for his wife. In addition to not having a say, the most important thing for the 4 small territories was that they really didn't have many troops to send out. After 2 years of chaos, civilians suffered heavy casualties. Now each small territory can only send more than 1,000 soldiers. Some territories even sent only a few hundred people. For example, Bill territory only sent 600 people. Lily was eager for revenge. With the support of Mike, she forcibly recruited some of the private soldiers of the rich and powerful. Otherwise, she would not even have 300 soldiers. Lily's current living expenses are all supported by her husband, Mike. With the current income of Bill territory, she may starve to death as a lord. The miserable situation of Bill territory, to be precise, should be the miserable situation of Lord Lilly, which is also one of the reasons for the formation of this coalition. None of these lords want to become unable to afford food. Because of this, under the combination of various reasons, this coalition is considered to be formed. These lords did not say to boost morale and swear to go to war. Anyway, they have their knights, and these lords just need to enjoy life in the back. Even if the knights die in battle, they will only feel sorry and then promote new knights. Therefore, the dignitaries at the banquet had no idea what kind of treatment the soldiers they sent to the front would receive. Outside the city of Bill, in the coalition army camp, the first knights sent by the 3 major territories were discussing how to attack. The 3 of them were also the greatest commanders of the army. What is there to discuss? There are so many of us. Just rush up directly. I think we should just attack directly. Ben is the number 1 knight of Shangdao territory. Because he has the most soldiers under his command, he speaks a little arrogantly. The 3 of them used to be old rivals. Now because of the coalition, they can only get together, but it is a little impossible for them to let go of their past grudges. Ben, you also heard what the soldiers who were sent out said, right? It's not okay to rush up directly in such a dangerous place. Billy is the number 1 knight of Yuzheng territory. He is a cautious person. After hearing the spy report about the dangers of Qian Pass, he was very worried. Now he heard Ben's suggestion, but he was very dissatisfied. Billy is right, Ben. Don't think you can be arrogant just because you have a lot of men. Let's have a fight after this battle. Chat is the first knight of the Boenta. Although he has few soldiers under his command, none of them are weak. Just like I said just now, if you have the ability, let's have a fight. When Ben saw that both of the opponents opposed one of his points, he snorted and said with his hands folded, "Then tell me, how should we fight this battle?" Billy and Chat looked at each other and said nothing. If they knew how to fight, they would not be discussing it here. Chapter 155 Dynamics of both sides. Although Billy and Chat didn't know how to attack, they knew that it would not work to charge directly. Chat looked at the crude map on the table without saying anything, as if he was thinking about how to attack, but he was actually thinking, what kind of broken place is this? There is such a crack in the Olo Mountains? How can we fight this? Retreating is impossible, and attacking is suicide. What should we do? Haha, this time this knight brought a batch of secret weapons. As long as you 2 support us, the fortress ahead will definitely be broken. Billy finally couldn't help, but said proudly, after seeing Chat didn't have a good idea. Chat raised his head, stared at Billy who was proud, and asked curiously, what secret weapon is so powerful, and what support do you want? He thought for a long time, but couldn't come up with any good ideas. It seemed that there was no other way, except to attack by force. At this time, when he was embarrassed, he heard that Billy had a secret weapon, and he was very surprised. Yes, tell me. Ben also asked curiously. He was just purely curious, because in Ben's opinion, there was no other way, except to attack by force. Billy restrained his smug smile, just smiled slightly and said, you will know, when the time comes. The support this knight wants, is all the catapults in your hands. Chat just stared at him without answering, and Ben just looked at him curiously, as if he would not agree, unless he explained the reason. Seeing that the 2 were unmoved, he thought for a while and added, now we are a coalition army, there is no harm in letting me try. If it doesn't work, it won't be too late to attack by force, right? Chat also thought about it, and felt that what the other party said was right. He didn't have any other way anyway, so it would be better to let the other party try, so he nodded and agreed. Okay, it's up to you then. Ben also spread his hands indifferently, tilted his head, pursed his lips and said, Chat has agreed, so this knight will agree to you too. Anyway, we will still attack by force at that time. Billy didn't say much when he heard the words of distrust from the 2. He just smiled slightly and thought to himself, indeed, we will know when the time comes. Then I will let you see how powerful this knight is. As the discussion was finalized, the 50,000 man army immediately set out and headed towards the Qian Pass in the south. In less than 2 days, the army will arrive outside the pass. On the other side, inside the Qian Pass, Zhang Wei, Yushu, D King and Lu Su were also discussing. General D, Staff Officer Lu, you are more familiar with the Qian Pass, and you have also fought outside the pass. This time, you will be the ones to command. Zhang Wei took the initiative to give up the command at the meeting. Zhang Wei is not a person who will show off his strength. He knows that he is not as good as D King and Lu Su in terms of strategy and command experience, and the combat effectiveness of the infantry brigade is obviously much stronger than that of the guard brigade. Whether for victory, for the monarch, or for himself, he has to give up the command. Doing so will only benefit him without any harm. When Lu Su heard that Zhang Wei took the initiative to give up the command, he said seriously, "General Zhang is really a man of great righteousness. I admire him," he said, and saluted Zhang Wei with a fist. Lu Su's admiration is really from the heart. Only people who are so righteous can climb to such a high position. You must know that there are only 2 generals in the whole country, and the other party can occupy one of them, which shows his ability. D King also looked at Zhang Wei seriously, nodded and said, "Since General Zhang is so righteous, and this general is not an ungrateful person, then General Zhang will be responsible for commanding the cavalry under the wall of Qianqian Pass." D King also looked at Zhang Wei with satisfaction. Although his military rank was higher than that of the other party before, now the other party is on the same level as him. This is not a joke. As for letting Zhang Wei command the cavalry, it is because Zhang Wei's subordinates have a whole battalion of light cavalry, and he also has a lot of experience in cavalry. Silence, calmness, and prudence, loyalty, and understanding of the times, as well as the deep righteousness shown now. So many advantages are all concentrated in Zhang Wei. Even if he does not have much ability, his future achievements are unpredictable. Report. A loud shout came from outside the tent. Report to the 2 generals. The enemy troops outside the pass have marched towards Qianqian Pass. The messenger looked at the 2 generals in the tent and reported loudly. When D King heard that the enemy was coming, his eyes lit up, and he said in a cold voice, "Order the whole army, to defend according to the plan." Yes. The messenger clasped his fists and received the order and went to pass on the order. "General Zhang, we have been prepared for a long time. We are just waiting for the enemy to come and let the enemy see what a real natural moat is." Lu Su clasped his fists and said seriously, and then he took Yu Shu out of the tent. Zhang Wei also clasped his fists to D King and said, "General D, I will also prepare. Goodbye." After saying that, after waiting for D King to nod, he also stood up and left the tent. D King wrote a battle report in the tent alone, and after asking his personal soldiers to send pigeons to Qianqi City, he also went up to the city wall and began to command the defense. D King stood in front of the city gate tower, looking into the distance, thinking about the invisible enemy, and looking forward to the enemy's arrival. After this period of investigation, it has been learned that the enemy has 50,000 troops, but for several commanders of the Xia Kingdom, this is not a crisis at all. Sir Knight, ahead is a fortress built by the enemy on the pass of the Olo Mountains. A spy reported to the 3 knights. The 3 knights looked at the majestic pass in the distance, and their faces were not very good. Even Billy, who claimed to have a secret weapon. Although I have always heard that this fortress is very dangerous, it is just hearsay. After seeing it with my own eyes, I know that what I saw with my own eyes is far more dangerous than what I heard. In the eyes of Xia Guo, Qianqian Pass can only be regarded as a solid pass, not a fortress. Only when the wall behind the pass develops into a fully functional city, Qianqian Pass can be called a fortress. Let those scattered troops go and test it first, Billy suggested with an unpleasant face. Chat and Ben also nodded with a serious face, agreeing with Billy's suggestion. Those scattered troops refer to the nearly 5,000 troops gathered from 4 small territories. They were originally sent to be cannon fodder. If they are not used now, when will they be used? After more than a day's march, they finally arrived at the city. It would be unreasonable not to attack. If their lord knew about it, they would not be happy. General, the enemy is 3 kilometers away from the first city wall. Lu Su stood next to D King and reported. D King nodded and said, "All troops, prepare artillery shells." Since they knew the enemy had started the attack yesterday, they stayed on the city wall, listening to the enemy approaching step by step, and the atmosphere of war slowly spread. The first city wall of Qianqian Pass was built on a slope, only a short 100 meters away from the second city wall above, to ensure that standing on the second city wall, it can be directly attacked with a crossbow. The first city wall is 15 meters high, the same height as the second city wall, but because of the terrain, the second city wall is still a few meters higher than the first city wall. From the slope, you can only see 2 rows of battlements from a distance, and you can't see the second city wall behind. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. we cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 156. Before the test. In mid-June of the 5th year of Shianki, the weather was clear and sunny, but the afternoon sun was something that people could not avoid. This was the hot season, the season when rice grew rapidly. With sufficient fertilizer supply, the rice was growing well. In half a month, the second season of rice this year would be harvested. It looked like it would be another bumper season. The people of Zyre looked at the rice in the farmland, and their hearts were particularly fulfilled. But on the other hand, they were also praying for the soldiers fighting in the north, praying that their bravery could defend their country and protect their homes. Under the propaganda machine, all the people in the country knew that the enemy was invading, and they also knew that the enemy had bad intentions, but it was also under the official propaganda that they knew that their country had the confidence to win, and they did not have much worry. Under the long-term leadership of Yang Song, Zyre had been smooth sailing and moving forward courageously. The people had not directly experienced war, but because of this, after learning that the enemy was invading, the people could continue to live in peace. Report to the general. The enemy is setting up camp and cooking 5 kilometers away. Please give us instructions. The scout reported the latest enemy dynamics in a timely manner. Explore again. Deking stood in front of the gate tower on the second city wall, looking at the smoke rising in the distance. Yes. The scout looked at the majestic back in front of him, respectfully clasped his fists, and accepted the order, then quickly went down the city wall. At this time, Zhang Wei also walked up to the city wall, and saw Deking standing by the wall. He asked, General D, do we need to let the cavalry attack, while the enemy is still unstable? Deking turned his head and looked at Zhang Wei and said seriously, no, although this can severely damage the enemy, our casualties will also be great. Lu Su heard the noise and walked out of the tower. He happened to hear the conversation between the two. He laughed and said, General Zhang, our army is high above, and it is an advantage to lead the cavalry to charge the battle, but when we return, it will become a feint upwards, which is easier to go down than to come up. I know, as long as the soldiers bring enough dry food, I will not be prepared to come back after I charge down. Zhang Wei expressed his final thoughts. When Deking and Lu Su heard Zhang Wei's words, they understood each other's thoughts even more. Zhang Wei meant that the cavalry he led had no effect at all in the battle to defend the city. It would be better to lead the cavalry to charge the enemy while the enemy was still unstable, which would definitely be able to severely damage the enemy. Then, while the enemy is in chaos, break through the enemy formation and enter the enemy's rear. At that time, whether it is to attack the enemy's logistics line or hide on one side and attack and harass, after discovering the enemy's flaws, it is all possible. However, there are great risks in doing so. If the enemy blocks the retreat, they can only fight to support the war, which will also cause great psychological pressure on the soldiers. Although it can strike the enemy faster and end the war quickly, it is done at the cost of the soldiers' lives. In addition, Zhang Wei actually proposed this tactic with a little selfishness. He is a general after all, but now he can only be a cold bench, so he wants to create some opportunities for himself to perform. General Zhang, there is no need to say more. This general will not agree with this tactic. The casualties of this tactic are too great, and even the king will not agree. Deking raised his hand to signal the other party not to say anything more. In order to completely dispel Zhang Wei's little thoughts, Deking even brought Yang Song out. Whether it is taking the initiative to attack or defending and counter-attacking, it is all to defend the natural ditch pass. As for the question of whether they can defeat the enemy, none of them mentioned it, because it is inevitable. It was precisely because he knew that the final victory was in his grasp that Zhang Wei dared to propose this risky tactic, because later on he might not even have the chance to appear. Okay, I'll just wait. Zhang Wei didn't have much hope, and since the other side had brought out the monarch, he no longer insisted. In addition to trying it out, Zhang Wei did this to tell Deking and the others that, although he had given up the command, he was still here, so they should not ignore him. Lu Su looked at Zhang Wei, who was walking down the wall again, and said to Deking with a little amusement, haha, you're still a little too anxious. Deking also smiled gently and replied without turning his head, "Young people, I can understand. At a young age, he was in a high position, had the monarch's attention, and had won several battles. Now in such a big war, he could only help. It was inevitable that he felt unwilling, and it was also normal. Zhang Wei was really unwilling in his heart. Although he knew that his ability and experience were not as much as Deking, he still didn't want to miss this battle. Last time, he was sent to guard the pass because he was just a small battalion commander, but now he is also a general, but he can only help. It would be strange if he could be willing. Zhang Wei's unwillingness inside the pass did not affect the coalition forces outside the pass. At around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the coalition forces that had eaten gathered 3 kilometers away. The dense crowd in the army that could not be seen at a glance made many new recruits who had never been on the battlefield at the pass a little scared. Chat rode on the wildebeest and looked at the army around him with satisfaction. Only when you are in it will you know how many people there are in the number of 50,000. You can't see the edge. Ben, Billy, and Chat were a little nervous at first, but now they saw that the army on their side was gathered together, and it was simply boundless, so their last bit of worry was gone. It was also the first time for the 3 of them to lead such a large army. Compared with the previous army of more than 10,000, in their hearts, this was a symbol of invincibility. Although full of confidence, there should still be some temptation. Order the 5,000 troops in front to launch a tentative attack. The 3 of them had already discussed that today's tentative attack would be commanded by Chat. As the order was issued, the 5,000 mixed troops in front, carrying simple long ladders, launched a charge towards the fortress in front. On the other side of the Cheyenne Pass, from Deking to ordinary soldiers, they had already made preparations when the other side assembled their troops. All the infantry, artillery, and militia were in their positions. Because the number of soldiers responsible for fighting is limited, in order to maximize the defense of the city wall, in addition to the artillery, all the infantry are concentrated on the first city wall. Otherwise, such a long city wall cannot be fully occupied, so how can it be defended? Strong crossbowmen, archers and crossbowmen were all ready to go. Sword and shield soldiers stood in front. Spearmen stood in small teams behind the sword and shield soldiers. Artillerymen lifted the waterproof cloth covering the artillery. Heavy shield soldiers guarded the key points, and the few heavy infantrymen were ready to put out fires at any time as emergency teams. The militia was busy transporting supplies up and down, especially the timely supply of ammunition. The 100 caters of gunpowder, 10 shrapnel shells, and 10 solid bullets of the No. 3 Siege Artillery of the First Wall are transported by the No. 103 Militia Squad. The 100 caters of gunpowder, 10 shrapnel shells, and 10 solid bullets of the No. 6 Field Artillery of the Second Wall are transported by the No. 313 Militia Squad. The 1,000 strong crossbow arrows, 3,000 bow and arrows, and 6,000 crossbow arrows of the First Wall Section 6 are transported by the militia squads No. 15 to No. 35. The Cheyenne Pass, which was in a state of war, was full of order, and even the most chaotic militiamen were in order in the chaos. Chapter 157, Probing Attack. The 20,000 militiamen were divided into 2,000 militia teams of 10 people each, and they were doing their respective jobs according to the orders. Some were responsible for transporting supplies, some were responsible for food, and some were responsible for transporting the wounded. And the one responsible for commanding these militiamen was a temporary logistics support headquarters composed of Lu Su, Yushu, the military bureau, and the rear security bureau. The logistics support headquarters was headed by Lu Su, Yushu was the deputy, and the rest of the staff provided assistance. If there was no professional headquarters for the 20,000 militiamen, so many people would not be able to achieve order in chaos like now. Because this time it was not just a single brigade, but a joint operation of multiple troops, and this much military force was also the first time for the Xia Kingdom. So in order to ensure that everything was foolproof, at the suggestion of Yang Li, Yang Song approved the establishment of this temporary logistics support headquarters. It is estimated that Yang Li did not dare to take such a big responsibility alone. And what was the result? Whether the logistics support was timely, accurate and effective? That depends on this water test. Deking watched the enemy form a square formation. He didn't notice anything when he was far away. When the enemy got closer, he could see from the telescope that it was a very messy team. He could tell at a glance that they were just cannon fodder sent by the enemy to test the defense strength of the pass. Beat the drum. Prepare to start the battle. Deaking didn't care whether the enemy was sent to test or not. He just issued an order to start the battle according to the battle plan. Order the city defense artillery to load shrapnel shells. Target 900 meters ahead. Deaking saw from the telescope that the enemy's siege troops only had some simple long ladders and not even a siege vehicle. It was a bit incredible. They were really cannon fodder sent to die. Since the enemy was testing, how could he show all his strength at the beginning? So for the sake of caution, Deaking only let the 27 heavy city defense artillery fire to see if there was anything hidden in the enemy's testing army. The total distance is 3 kilometers, and the charge distance is 1 kilometer. By the time the distance suitable for the charge is reached, more than 10 minutes have passed. The last kilometer is the charge distance, and it is also the most dangerous distance. Especially the few hundred meters near the city wall is a death zone for the attacker. Fire the guns. With Deaking's order, the last kilometer became the last kilometer of the enemy's life. Boom boom boom. In the sound of continuous artillery, 27 shells were fired by the city defense artillery. The firing distance would have been longer if the artillery was fired from a high position, but under Deaking's order, the artillery deliberately reduced the loading of gunpowder in order to attack the target. After the shell slid through a graceful arc in the air, they fell into the enemy's army formation, accompanied by 27 explosions. 27 fireballs and 27 groups of black smoke emerged from the enemy formation. Boom boom boom. Some human body parts visible to the naked eye were thrown into the air and did not fall to the ground for a long time. After a round of bombardment, the enemy did not give up the attack. Some commands sounded in the army, as if urging the attack. After the last war, the enemy must have known that the Zaire kingdom had a weapon that could explode. It seemed that artillery could no longer make the enemy retreat. Looking at this military formation used for testing, we can know that the enemy is ready to pile up their lives. Deaking looked at the other party's performance thoughtfully, and his eyes suddenly became cold. He could even predict the miserable situation under this pass in a few days. Continue the artillery to defend the city. Prepare the rolling stones. As the order continued to be issued, accompanied by the roar of artillery, a row of round stone balls with a diameter of 1 meter appeared on the chute of the first city wall. Then, under the command of release the stone balls, a row of 30 round stone balls slid out of the city wall and crushed towards the enemy. The defense facilities of the first city wall are not simple. Since there is a slope outside the city wall, such terrain should be used. Every 30 meters on the wall, there is a downward chute. The exit of this chute is opened in the upper half of the wall, and the entrance is on the wall. Next to it, there are rows of identical rolling stones, ready to fall into it at any time. This kind of rolling stone is carved from rocks that can be seen everywhere. It is also a permanent city defense material in the natural ditch pass. There is no other stone in the entire mountain range, but there are many stones, so it doesn't take much effort to carve it out. The stone ball with a diameter of 1 meter falls down the slope along the chute of the wall, and then along a preset groove on the slope. It rolls straight towards the enemy. There are stones rolling down. Ah! Help! Get out of the way! Don't block me! Ah! The enemy soldiers looked at the rapidly rolling boulders and wanted to dodge, but they were surrounded by their own people. After having nowhere to hide, they could only shout helplessly in despair, and then were crushed into a pile of minced meat by the rapidly rolling stone balls. As the distance increased, the speed of the stone ball became faster and faster. The enemy's flesh and fat was the best lubricant. The rolling stones went all the way down. Some of them bounced a few times after encountering bumps, which was even more deadly. Until the end, most of the rolling stones were blocked by the enemy's dense corpses. Some of the rolling stones suddenly broke into pieces while rolling. Only a few rolling stones on the side rolled down the cliff. The rolling of a stone ball is a bloody road. According to Deaking's estimation, this round crushed and killed 400 or 500 enemy soldiers. Such killing efficiency is even much stronger than artillery. A row of rolling stones plus 3 rounds of artillery fire. The enemy's casualties are about to exceed 1,000. Nearly 1/5 of the casualties made the soldiers who came to test the army flee back in a hurry. Looking at that, they really wished they had 2 less legs. From beginning to end, the enemy did not approach the 500-meter range of the city wall, and no crossbow arrows were fired. The enemy did not even touch the corner of the wall, and they could not even see what the city wall looked like. Report to Sir Knight, the troops that went to test have all fled back. A junior officer hurried to chat to report. What? The 5,000 troops in front have all fled back? So fast? Chat couldn't believe it. How long have they been sent out? Less than half an hour, and they have already fled back. Tell me, what happened? Billy was also a little bit unbelievable. Just now, he could hear the shouting and killing in the front, and then he heard a burst of explosions like thunder, and then heard the news that the army in front was defeated. It happened too fast. Although he knew that the enemy's weapons were powerful, they couldn't be so powerful, right? It was not long, and he hadn't even opened the wine jug, and the 5,000 troops were driven back. Chapter 158 Zyal and Zyaljan. My lord knight, in addition to an explosive weapon, the fortress above also has many round boulders to attack our army. The officer answered the knight's questions truthfully. Billy frowned and said, round boulders? In this place, using stones is really a good idea. Good idea. Billy, you are still praising the enemy? The situation is urgent, and you are still praising the enemy? Ben heard Billy's mumbling, and looked at Billy with surprise. Chad pressed his hand towards Ben and said, okay, it's already this time, why are you still bothering about this? Then he turned to Billy and asked, Billy, now is not the time to praise the enemy. Do you have any way to deal with the rolling stones in the fortress? Will your secret weapon work? Billy first looked at the serious Chat, and then at Ben, who looked indifferent. The other party was obviously looking for trouble with him just now. He said helplessly, secret weapons can't deal with the enemy's rolling stones. After listening to this, Ben folded his arms, laughed and said, in the end, we still have to rush up together. Chat saw that Billy, who had some brains, had no idea, so he said, we can only rush up, but this place is only more than 1,000 meters wide. There are so many of us, we can't rush up at once. Billy's frowning brows suddenly lit up when he heard what Chat said, and he said, I've thought of a way. What way? The two asked in unison. Billy smiled at the two people who were asking the same question, and said, the solution is very simple, just rush forward, and use the secret weapon that this knight brought, and we will definitely break through this fortress. Listen to me, tomorrow we will do this first, then this, and finally this. In this way, this fortress will be ours. Billy then explained to the two the solution he had thought of, and also told them the usage and power of his secret weapon, and finally emphasized, this method must be paid attention to, and the soldiers in front cannot be allowed to escape back. Once the soldiers in front want to escape back, there is only one word, kill. When Billy said the word kill, his face was full of murderous intent. Chat hummed and said seriously, this is a must. Since we have such a secret weapon, we can't let these soldiers do whatever they want. He also ordered the officer beside him, you have heard the plan just now. Order it. Those who escape tomorrow must not only be killed, but their families must also be enslaved. Yes, I will pass the order now. The officer was frightened by the plan of the knights, and was sweating profusely. How many people would die, but he didn't dare to say anything. He could only hurriedly leave the tent to convey the order of the knights. Ben didn't know when he put down his arms in his arms. At this time, he didn't care about his attitude anymore. He said seriously, let the soldiers who escaped today rush to the front tomorrow. The mercenaries under this knight will follow. This knight will be responsible for supervising the discipline tomorrow. Okay, this knight will be responsible for all the catapults and secret weapons of the whole army. The army in hand will be handed over to you two to command. Billy agreed, emphasizing that he was only responsible for the secret weapons. Chat nodded and agreed with the division of the task, saying, then this knight will be responsible for commanding the army to charge at the back tomorrow. After dividing their respective tasks, the three of them all breathed a sigh of relief in their hearts, thinking that they could finally complete the task assigned to them by the Lord. Looking at the boundless army, it was magnificent, but the inner pressure also came up. With so many troops, if they were defeated in the end, they would not have a good life when they returned. In the monarch's mansion in Qianqi City, Yang Song was holding his less than 1-year-old child, accompanied by the monarch's wife Xiaolan, sitting in the pavilion in the back garden, leisurely enjoying the flowers and feeding the fish. "My husband, it's time for Xiana to pee. Come and hold me." After giving birth to a child, Xiaolan became more gentle as water. Yang Song laughed and said, "It's the same for me to come here. Why are you so anxious? I finally took some time out of my busy schedule to come and accompany you. You still don't want to leave, right? Little Yang Xian? Haha. Husband. You." Xiaolan looked at Yang Song, who looked like a big child, covered her mouth and chuckled. Just as she was about to say something, she heard, "Report. Report to the king. There is an urgent military report from the front." The guards interrupted Yang Song's hard-earned leisure time with an anxious look on their faces. "Xiaolan, come. Xiana is for you." When Yang Song heard that it was an urgent military report from the front, his face became serious, and he handed the baby in his arms to Xiaolan, saying apologetically, "Look, I can't delay this. Husband, I know. I will take good care of Xiana, and I will also tell Sister Xiaolan. It's a pity that she is still making snacks now." Xiaolan took the child with both hands, coaxed the crying child, and comforted Yang Song with understanding. Yang Song nodded in satisfaction, but he felt even more guilty, so he had to say, "Well, tell Xiaojuan to be careful. She's still pregnant, and leave the snacks for me to eat when I come back in the evening. Also, not only Xiana, you have to take care of yourself too." After saying that, he turned around decisively, left the pavilion, and left the back garden. That made him feel calm with his guards, leaving Xiaolan alone in the pavilion holding the child, silently watching Yang Song's back as he walked away. "Sister, where is my husband? The cakes are all ready." Xiaojuan, with a big belly, brought 2 little maids to hold a red round tray with a plate of white cakes on it. When she saw that Yang Song was gone from the pavilion and Xiaolan was the only one left, she looked around and asked, "Sister, my husband just left to deal with military affairs. He asked me to tell you to be careful and take care of yourself. You can only eat the pastries when he comes back in the evening." Xiaolan looked at Xiaojuan, who was having difficulty walking, and asked the maid next to her to support her, fearing that she would fall accidentally. After hearing what Xiaolan said, Xiaojuan was a little disappointed and muttered, "I made the glutinous rice cake with great difficulty, but it won't taste good when it gets cold." Xiaolan was also helpless. Who let their husband be the king of a country? She had to comfort Xiaojuan. "Sister, husband is really busy. Don't stand. Come and sit down and chat with your sister. By the way, sister, count the days. You are about to give birth, right?" "Yes, it's almost soon. It's about this period of time." "Sister, is it painful to give birth?" "Sister, I remember when you gave birth to Xiana, I heard it clearly outside the room." Sister screamed so loudly. Xiaojuan sat on the soft chair beside her with the help of the maid, touched her round belly, and asked a little worriedly. Finally, she remembered the scene of Xiaolan giving birth, and teased Xiaolan. "Sister, you will know when you give birth. If you come to tease your sister now, you won't be able to laugh when the time comes." Xiaolan saw that Xiaojuan, who was about to become a mother, was still so naughty, and she rolled her eyes helplessly. Sister." Xiaojuan touched her belly and saw the helpless expression of Xiaolan, who was coaxing the child. She giggled, but she just called her sister and nothing else. Xiaolan looked down at the cute little face of her child, who slowly fell asleep under her gentle singing. She looked up at Xiaojuan, who didn't continue to speak, her face suddenly startled, and said, "Sister, what's wrong with you? Go and call the doctor. It hurts. My stomach hurts, sister. I'm afraid I'm about to give birth." Xiaojuan frowned and cried out in pain. "Madam, the second wife's amniotic fluid broke. She's about to give birth." The professionally trained maid saw the water stains on Xiaojuan's skirt and shouted directly, "Go and call the midwife." Xiaolan heard the maid's words and hurriedly gave orders, and then comforted Xiaojuan. "Sister, take a deep breath. Don't be nervous. It's a pity for your husband. PS, if I write Zyrogen to death here, will someone send me a razor blade? Chapter 159 Launching the attack. Yang Song didn't know that his second child was about to be born. He was now meeting Chenping in the study. In fact, even if he knew, what could he do? Could he abandon his current military affairs and wait anxiously outside the delivery room? Even if he went, what could he do? He could only worry. Yang Song also knew that he had no time to care about these things when he was busy, so he invited all the doctors and midwives into the mansion so that he could do things with peace of mind. Since Yang Song married Zyalin and Zyojin, he recruited some servants. This was necessary. It was also, since these maids and old women entered the monarch's mansion, that this huge mansion became a little lively. Your Majesty, yesterday's battle ended after the enemy retreated hastily. Today's battle was very fierce. The enemy's soldiers were completely crazy and desperately attacked the pass. After receiving the morning battle report, Chenping sorted it out a little and hurriedly reported to Yang Song. Yang Song read the battle report with a frown. After Bendiking easily repelled the enemy's probing attack yesterday, he thought the enemy would be quiet for a while, so today he dared to play with the children in the back garden so leisurely. But he didn't expect that the enemy would dare to press forward with all their troops for a decisive battle after just a hasty probing yesterday. This was really beyond his expectations. Yang Song read the battle report, put it down, and told Chenping, "Okay, I know. Pay close attention and report to me as soon as possible if there is anything." "Yes, I obey." Chenping was originally here to deliver the battle report, and now he is just fulfilling his duties. After Yang Song saw Chenping off, he hurriedly opened the small map, zoomed into Xianqian Pass, and carefully looked at the actual battle situation. Outside the first wall of Xianqian Pass, the bodies were almost piled up to the height of the wall. You know, this is a 15-meter high wall. How many people died? Time went back to the morning before the battle. Report. General, the enemy has launched a full-scale charge. The sentry outside pushed open the gate of the tower and reported to Deking, who was thinking. Deking raised his head from the sand table on the table, listened to the shouts coming from outside the door and the city wall, and hurriedly picked up the monocular telescope placed aside. He took 2 steps at a time and quickly made the tower. He came to the city wall, looked out through the telescope along the gap in the parapet. He saw the dense enemy troops charging desperately. The front row held up simple shields, followed by many soldiers carrying long ladders. Under the command of the officers in the army, they all charged upward desperately. The slope outside the Xianqian Pass is divided into 3 parts. The closer to the city wall, the greater the slope. More than 100 meters in front of the city gate, the slope is as much as 30%. On this steep slope, there is a groove every 30 meters, which is prepared for the accelerated guidance of the stone ball. The slope of the middle part is a gradual slope from 20% to 10%, and the distance is 2 or 3 kilometers. The slope of the last part at the bottom will gradually become gentler, and the distance is the entire passage. The slope refers to the degree of steepness of the surface unit, usually expressed as a percentage of the vertical height and horizontal distance of the slope. For example, a slope of 5% means that for every 100 meters of horizontal advance, the vertical rise is 5 meters. The location of the Xianqian Pass is in the middle of the mountain range, and the height from the gentle ground is 1 or 2 kilometers. Therefore, although the enemy soldiers are charging upward, they still run very fast. It only took 10 minutes to rush nearly 2 kilometers from a distance of 3 kilometers, which is exactly the same speed as the army that tested yesterday. Seeing that the enemy actually launched a general attack today, Deking was a little incredible. Logically, shouldn't they launch a general attack after completely testing the defensive strength? What is the enemy commander thinking? So desperate. The enemy's probing yesterday gave Deking a feeling that the enemy's commander was a steady and cautious person. He didn't expect that he would be caught off guard today, but would it work? Suddenly, Deking saw through the telescope that a row of large equipment was pushed out from behind the enemy's formation. It looked like catapults and trebuchets. Beat the drums. Blow the horns. Raise the flags. Order. Load the siege artillery with solid bullets and target the large equipment behind the enemy. Deking looked at the large equipment in the distance and felt uneasy for no reason. he ordered the siege artillery with the longest range to destroy the enemy's equipment. After giving the order, Deking felt a little relieved. Seeing that the enemy in front had entered the range of 1 kilometer, he charged more vigorously and issued a series of orders. Order: load the field artillery and the city defense artillery with shrapnel shells. Target the enemy outside the city. Order: the crossbowmen and archers are ready for 3-stage covering fire. Order: the crossbowmen are ready and they will fire freely after the enemy enters the range. Order: all melee soldiers on the city wall are ready to engage the enemy. Order: prepare to continue dropping rolling stones. Deking put down the telescope and looked at the dark masses of enemy soldiers under the city. They were like waves, rushing towards the solid city walls, but the result that awaited them was already doomed. Long-range artillery is ready. Field artillery and city defense artillery are ready. Rolling stones are ready. In less than a minute, messengers kept feeding back to Deking the information that each type of army was ready. Logistics support is ready. At this time, Lusu's familiar voice sounded in Deking's ears. Deking turned his head and looked at Lusu sternly. Lusu hurriedly clasped his fists and reported, "General, Yushu and Yukanjin are here for logistics support. You can rest assured." Lusu also knew that the war was urgent at this time. If he left his post at this time, resulting in a lack of logistics supply, it would cause very serious consequences. So he used a very fast speed to roughly explain the purpose of his coming here. Yukanjin's ability is very worthy of recognition. He can handle it completely. It was also he who took the initiative to let his subordinates come here to assist the general in defense. After hearing Lusu's explanation, Deking nodded and quickly replied, "Okay. Go and see if there are any loopholes." Deking only looked at Lusu sternly after hearing Lusu's voice. The rest of the time, he was staring at the movements of the enemy outside the city. "Yes, General." Lusu also knew that Deking was under a lot of pressure now. This was because he had something important to do. If other people did this, they would be subject to battlefield discipline if they were not careful. How much pressure did Deking have? As long as you know that this battle concerns the lives of the people of the whole country, you will know. In other words, he is now shouldering the lives of the Emperor, himself and these tens of thousands of soldiers, and even 300,000 ordinary people. Under such great pressure, he can still stand on the top of the city and command the battle calmly and steadily. What kind of psychological quality does this require? It's awe-inspiring to think about it. Watching the enemy army quickly rushing through the 900-meter front line, Deking raised his right hand. The messengers next to him stared at his raised right hand, waiting for the moment it fell. 850 meters. The right arm in the long-awaited eyes of the messengers fell. "Fire. The general has an order. Fire." With the shout of the messenger, the flag standing on the high ground waved quickly. Boom, boom, boom. Woo, woo, woo. The sound of war drums and horns resounded throughout the entire pass. The artillery commander, who had been waiting for a long time, saw the order from the flag and waved the red triangular flag in his hand heavily. Fire. Chapter 160 Strong Defense. Boom, boom, boom. At this moment, 81 field guns, 36 siege guns, and 27 city defense guns all roared at their targets with the power of scientific and technological civilization. A black solid shell was fired from the barrel of a siege gun, flew a long distance, and when it landed at its destination, it had already become red and hot. There was an iron shield at the landing point of the shell, and along with the scattered debris of the shield-bearing soldier behind him also became torn into pieces. Next was a catapult behind the shield-bearing soldier. In an instant, it came into close contact with the shell, and was scattered by the kinetic energy it carried. Finally, after the shell smashed a few more soldiers, it lost its kinetic energy, and embedded itself in the chest of a soldier who flew backwards. The fragments and parts of the catapult that flew away made the soldiers guarding around it unlucky. They were injured and disabled. A bursting shell, propelled by gunpowder, flew a short distance, and landed in the dense crowd. After smashing a soldier's head, it rolled to the ground. A soldier holding a spear was suddenly stunned by the head that exploded in front of him. The soldier with a face full of red and white things lowered his head in a daze, looking at the round weapon that was emitting green smoke. The soldier's feeling told him that there was something wrong with this smoking black ball. The soldier's pupils suddenly contracted, and his heart seemed to be held by something, making him forget to breathe. Boom. In an instant, the soldier and several comrades around him flew into the sky in a burst of white light. In the last bit of consciousness of the soldier, he felt that his body became light and weightless, and the scene in front of him also began to flip rapidly. In just a moment, he caught a glimpse of a familiar scene, and the rest was eternal darkness. The soldier didn't know, nor could he know, that his body had been torn into pieces. His head, which was still intact, was blown dozens of meters away, and fell at the feet of a soldier holding a battle axe. Finally, he was kicked and trampled everywhere in the surging crowd, until he was deeply stepped into the road, and merged with the earth, indistinguishable from each other. Standing on the city wall, it can be clearly seen that the enemy's army was divided into two parts by the dense artillery. One part was the soldiers behind the artillery fire. Seeing the blazing flame curtain in front of them, they dared not move forward, but under the push of the soldiers behind them, they had to be pushed into the sea of fire step by step, and at the cost of their own flesh and blood, they extinguished this wall of fire with billowing black smoke. The other part was the soldiers rushing in front. Listening to the movement behind them, the momentum of charging forward became more crazy. Some soldiers who twisted their necks backwards were frightened by the sea of fire behind them. Deaking looked at the enemy less than 500 meters away. He could even see the crazy and desperate look on the faces of the enemy soldiers through the monocular telescope. Because they are enemies, there is no mercy, no pity. In Deaking's eyes there is only the coldness of his heart. Release the rolling stones. So he issued an order to let the enemy step into hell. A row of 30 stone balls were pushed down from the city wall. The height of more than 10 meters above the ground gave these stone balls enough kinetic energy, and then they quickly rolled down the slope along the preset slide groove. The rolling stones are coming. Hide quickly. A soldier standing on the front line, holding a shield, looked at the rolling stones. The overwhelming and unstoppable momentum made him scream. But he was surrounded by his own people. Even if he wanted to hide, where could he hide? A stone ball with a diameter of 1 meter could not jump so high, and he dodged to the side, but his comrades next to him were also dodging. With no way to hide, the soldier holding a shield could only watch the rolling stones getting closer and closer to him, and he was closing his eyes and waiting to die, but he didn't feel any pain. After waiting for a long time, and only heard desperate cries from behind him, when he opened his eyes, he saw that the rolling stone had jumped up in front of him, passed over his head, and made negative contact with the head of his comrade behind him. They were all turned into meat paste. He turned his head to look at the tragic scene behind him, feeling fortunate, but he saw his comrade, who was lucky enough to survive, was looking behind him, without any relief, only with complete despair on his face. Bang! The soldier who was fortunate was crushed into the ground in an instant, turning into a pool of blurred flesh and blood. All that was left was a pile of rags and a shield that was broken into pieces and carved into the ground. Fortunately, the rolling stone was not big, so these soldiers who were crushed to death still had a rough human appearance. If it was a huge boulder with a diameter of several meters, I'm afraid they wouldn't even be able to recognize it as a head. There is a reason why the rolling stones on the wall of Cheyenne Pass are set to a diameter of 1 meter. It's not that there are no larger rolling stones, but there is no need for that. Because although larger rolling stones can cause greater damage to the enemy, the wall is only so wide and has such a high span, and it is impossible to transport and place these huge boulders. So such a large rolling stone is enough, and the quality can be compensated by quantity. 1 meter sized stone balls are much more convenient to transport. Therefore, Deaking asked the soldiers on the city wall to release the rolling stones as much as possible this time, without worrying about consumption. In the later stage, even if there are remaining rolling stones, they will be useless. Because when it comes to the ant-attached siege stage, the city has been covered with corpses. Even if there are rolling stones left, they can't roll. Not only can they not kill a few people, but they may also build a step for the enemy to climb up. So now the rolling stones on the city wall are one after another, row after row, heading towards the enemy's eyes. It can be seen with the naked eye that the enemies are immediately cleared wherever the rolling stones pass, but in front of the crowd, this little power becomes light and useless, and the advancing front line is still approaching. In front of the sea-like crowd, the artillery in the middle position is just a splash of waves, fleeting. Even if a small area of the enemy is cleared, it will be filled up by the soldiers behind in the blink of an eye. Although part of the catapults in the distance were destroyed, there were more remaining, and there were endless catapults coming from behind, one after another. The swarming enemy formations. Even if a soldier in front was injured and fell to the ground, he had no chance to stand up again, because he had been trampled to death by his own people. Looking at all this, Deaking's pressure instantly became greater, but he couldn't show any worry, because he was the commander-in-chief of the entire army. Order. Long-range infantry start defense. Order. Close combat infantry prepare to throw mines. Chapter 161, Fierce Battle at the Pass. The mines that Deaking ordered the Malay infantry to prepare were homemade grenades. The outer shell of this kind of grenade is a special pottery jar, which is spherical and has an opening only the size of a thumb. It is filled with gunpowder and has a long fuse on the outside. It weighs 10 kilograms and is powerful enough in order to facilitate transportation and prevent fragmentation. A wooden square frame is also set on the outside. When using it, just light the fuse and throw it down the city wall together with the wooden frame. However, because it is too heavy, it cannot be thrown too far. It is fine for defense from a high position, but if it is used for attack, it can only blow itself up. Boom boom boom. The roar of the artillery never stopped, and the enemy's catapult was moving forward, so the probability of being hit was extremely small. Deaking looked at the enemy's catapult that was advancing at great losses, and ordered all artillery to fill them with solid bullets. Target the siege equipment behind the enemy. In response to Deaking's order, the target of the artillery attack quickly blasted towards the enemy's rear. This time, all the field artillery was fully loaded with propellant. With the advantage of being high above, the attack distance of these artillery reached 1,500 meters. This attack was very effective. Many catapults and the soldiers guarding and pushing them were all turned into parts. However, without the artillery in front to block and delay, the enemy troops under the city moved forward much more smoothly. Report to the general. All the rolling stones have been dropped. Deaking listened to the report of the messenger and watched the enemy troops under the city rushing forward quickly after the rolling stones were no longer blocking them. He immediately ordered the long-range infantry began to attack. Yes, the messenger sent the order again. In the enemy army formation under the city wall, an officer saw that the fortress in front was not dropping deadly rolling stones and shouted excitedly, "They have no more stones. Rush, and we will win if we rush over." The soldiers were frightened by the tragic scene in front of them. After seeing that there was no hope of survival, they were only desperate, and then after despair, they were crazy. They rushed forward frantically following the soldiers in front of them, frantically watching their comrades in front of them being crushed into a pool of mincemeat, and frantically accepting the coming of death. The soldiers in such a state heard a glimmer of hope for survival, so they looked forward carefully, waited for a while, and saw that there was really no rolling stone falling from the fortress in front of them, and they all shouted excitedly, and rushed forward and upward with all their strength. And Deaking was watching the enemy army approaching the city wall so quickly, and gave the order for the long-range infantry to attack. Strong crossbow soldiers. Start 3-stage shooting. First row, shoot. A frontline officer gave the order for the strong crossbow to start 3-stage shooting. Second row, shoot. Third row, shoot. First row, shoot. Another officer in charge of commanding the archers also gave the order. Archers, start throwing. Ready, fire. The strong crossbows and archers carried out a covering attack on the enemy troops under the city wall from a high position. In such a situation, there is no need for any accuracy or strength, so even a strong crossbow can be used for projectiles, and the attack distance is at least 500 meters. Bows and arrows were originally prepared as projectile weapons, but with a height bonus of more than 10 meters, the attack distance is nearly 300 meters. However, the crossbows cannot enjoy this convenience, because the crossbow arrows are short, and have no tail feathers. Even if they are projectiles, when they land, these crossbow arrows are estimated to be horizontal, oblique, and upside down, so they have no lethality. Therefore, even with a height of 15 meters, the increased range can only be said to be better than nothing. The enemy troops in front are holding various shields, and many of them still rush into the range of 100 meters. Crossbowmen. Free shooting. The order issued by the officer who commanded the crossbowmen was the simplest, and after he gave the order, he immediately picked up his crossbow and fired at the enemy troops under the city. Melee infantry start throwing thunder. This order was issued by Deking, and only he could command so many infantry. Although the long-range infantry had a long range and was very powerful, there were only 2,000 of them, and they were still not strong enough to face the enemy troops under the city wall that looked like a river. But with the participation of more than 2,000 melee infantry, the enemy troops under the city had a hard time, and it was simply difficult to move. The enemy troops were still attacking fiercely when they couldn't even put up the long ladders, and they didn't give up at all, as if sending themselves to death was something that the enemy troops were very happy to do. In the end, the enemy troops who came forward one after another used their bodies to fix some long ladders, but an embarrassing scene appeared for the remaining enemies. They couldn't reach them. The enemy troops in front couldn't see what was happening on the top of the city, so they kept putting up long ladders. The enemy soldiers behind knew it, but under the explosions, shouts, and desperate shouts before death on the battlefield, no one could hear what they were shouting. So, when some soldiers were about to climb to the top of the city, they found that they couldn't reach the top of the city at all. Looking at the distance, it was still 4 or 5 meters. Whether it was the soldiers climbing the ladder or the enemy soldiers under the city wall, the final result was only to become one of the many corpses. With a boom, a ladder was blown up by a homemade grenade, and several soldiers holding shields on it fell down screaming. Fortunately, there were a lot of cushions left, so no damage was caused, but the next few grenades took their lives. The corpses under the city wall piled up higher and higher, and the low-level knights of the enemy behind also noticed this phenomenon. He did not feel sad about the death of these soldiers, he only saw the upcoming victory. Hurry up and put all the ladders on the corpses. Hurry up, so that you can reach the top of the city wall. The order of the low-level knight was quickly conveyed to the front. These simple long ladders, which were not even cloud ladders, were soon firmly placed on the top of the city wall under the pile of enemy corpses. Although these long ladders were soon trampled by the soldiers on the top of the city wall with grenades, these long ladders were not worth much, and there were plenty of them in the enemy army. Report to the general, the speed of the damage to the ladder can no longer keep up. Lusu appeared from nowhere, with a little smoke on his face, and reported to Deking with an ugly look. An arrow from the enemy missed Deking not far away. He seemed to ignore the enemy's threat, looking at the enemy's crazy attack expressionlessly, and continued to order half of the melee infantry to prepare for melee defense. Deking ignored it, because a large number of personal guards gathered around him, holding various weapons and equipment in their hands, protecting him, the commander of the army. Chapter 162. The fight continues. Homemade grenades were not in short supply as the militiamen kept delivering them. What was lacking was the manpower to throw them. The artillery had basically destroyed the enemy's siege equipment, whether it was a siege vehicle or a catapult. The crossbowmen and archers were all attacking the enemy troops behind them, reducing the number of enemy troops coming to the city, and they also had a task, which was to suppress the enemy's archers. The crossbowmen were the main force for short-range output. Each crossbow box had only 10 short crossbow arrows, which could be fired in less than 10 seconds under the operation of the soldiers. The reloading speed of militiamen could not meet the needs of the crossbowmen, so there were several militiamen behind each crossbowman to help load the crossbow box. A large part of the corpses piled up under the city wall were the results of these crossbowmen. With sufficient supplies and sufficient reserve forces, these crossbowmen could output with confidence. In fact, only 2/3 of the more than 2,000 melee infantrymen were throwing grenades, and the rest were all defending against the enemy's long-range attacks. Since the enemy rushed to the city wall, the Zaya soldiers on the top of the city wall also suffered casualties. Although not many died in the battle, many were injured. So the current situation is that there is not only a lack of manpower to throw grenades, but also a lack of manpower for long-range attacks. And the soldiers will get tired. The enemy has been killed in batches, and the Zaya soldiers have been fighting for several hours, but now there is no replacement. It's not that there is no one at all, at least there are militias to help, but they are only used to help. The militias don't have full body armor for defense. This is because there are artillery to help block the enemy, otherwise the enemy would have climbed to the top of the city long ago. Deking didn't know that it was because he ordered the artillery to destroy the enemy's siege equipment first, that the enemy commander was angry and ordered to continue the attack with all his strength. Billy watched his secret weapon being destroyed before it could play any role. How could he bear it? Moreover, they were deceived by the intelligence they collected. In the intelligence, the enemy's artillery could only attack more than 1,000 meters at most, but they didn't expect that it could attack more than 2,000 meters now. This is one of the reasons why Deking and Lusu had to get close to the enemy before attacking in the last few battles. After seeing that their secret weapons were useless, the three knights unanimously decided not only to continue the attack, but also to strengthen the attack. The three of them saw the enemy's powerful combat power, but also saw the enemy's weakness, the small number of people. Since they are human, there will be times when they will get tired. They don't believe that the enemies on the opposite side are all made of iron. Even if they are really made of iron, how many nails can such a small number of people have on their bodies? So the three of them decided that they had so many people and they would tire the enemy out, even if they were tired. Because they also knew a reality, that is, if they didn't attack in the current state, they would never be able to attack in the future, and there would be no such opportunity. The three of them may not have heard of the illusion of repeated, and exhausted, but they still knew such a truth. Now they are forcing the soldiers to die by threatening their families. However, once they withdraw, it is estimated that, even if they are put to the neck, it will be impossible for them to charge again. Therefore, today's siege is both their first and their last chance. Order the soldiers in front that the enemy is about to die. Let them rush up quickly. The first soldier who attacks the top of the city will be rewarded with 10 gold coins and 100 acres of good farmland. This knight promises to recommend him as a knight. Billy urged anxiously and even used the popular method of heavy rewards. He didn't care whether this method was old-fashioned or not, as long as it worked. The so-called there must be a brave man under a heavy reward, no matter which world it is for ordinary soldiers. These soldiers have such an extremely generous reward when their retreat is cut off. Under this double push, the soldiers are no longer afraid of death. In the minds of these ordinary soldiers, they are just cheap lives anyway, and they are not worth much. If they die, they die. At least their families will not be implicated. But what if they succeed? This is to use a cheap life to win a noble for themselves, their families, and their descendants. But they don't think about who is the cause of all this now, and why. Isn't it the noble lords above their heads who, for their own desires and ambitions, have turned them into tools for the nobles to obtain private interests? In the end, even if they succeed, what can they get? Rewards or honors? None. They are just tools. Or the kind of tools that can be discarded and replaced at any time. This is the sadness of ordinary people in this world, who suffer from the lack of education. After being educated, they will at least know what this is for, and they will have the power to resist on the importance of education. But now, the warriors of the Zaya kingdom don't care what kind of background the enemy has, they will only attack the enemy fiercely with their weapons in their hands. Order the militia to participate in the defense. This is the first time that Deking has revealed a bit of emotion since the war began. Lusu has been a partner with Deking for so many years, and of course he heard Deking's voice over. So he thought for a while and said, "General, I suggest that all the soldiers participate in the defense, and the militia only need to throw grenades behind the parapet." After hearing Lusu's suggestion, Deking frowned slightly and nodded in agreement. "Okay, let's do it." If Lusu was not familiar with Deking, others would not be able to see that Deking had such a kind side under his resolute and majestic appearance. Although it is said that kindness does not command soldiers, Deking did not act emotionally, but treated his soldiers rationally. Just like the order just now, if there was no Lusu's suggestion, after the militia participated in the defense, they would definitely be able to defend, but the casualties of the militia would become very large. If Deking was emotional, he would not have issued this order. He just chose an appropriate option at the most appropriate time. And Lusu happened to have a flexible tactic at this time, allowing these militias to directly participate in the defense and minimize casualties to the maximum extent. This is the role of the staff. Before the war, no one would have thought that this battle would turn out like this, not even the enemy commander, the three knights. It was a war of attrition right from the start. In the eyes of the three enemy knights, they could easily win by using secret weapons. In the eyes of Deking, Lusu and others, this battle should be one-sided. The enemy should withdraw after suffering huge casualties, and then it would be a long tug-of-war. Then, the enemy's logistics were exhausted, and their manpower was greatly reduced after a long tug-of-war. Then, they could not bear it and retreated, and then they turned into a mass escape under their pursuit. But now, the development of the battle has completely deviated from the expectations of both sides. What will be the final result? No one knows. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 163, A Corner of Battle. And the situation Yang Song saw was exactly what it was now. There were piles of corpses outside the city. Yang Song looked at the extremely cruel battle at Chyanqian Pass from the small map and was very surprised, but after the surprise, he was deeply angry. How dare you do this? How dare you be so determined and spend such a huge price to destroy me? You really have an undying selflessness. Yang Song couldn't sit still. While watching the real-time picture of the battle, he walked around in the study with his hands behind his back. Although he was really angry, and the more he thought about it, the angrier he got, but fortunately he retained basic rationality, otherwise he didn't know what he would do. Although the emperor was angry and millions of corpses were buried, he was not the kind of feudal ruler who could act on impulse. The lessons of history and several years of monarch experience made him know the importance of having rationality. Moreover, the arrangements that should be made have been made, and the decisions that should be made have been made. Even if he is angry now, it will not help. Now what he has to do is to coordinate the whole country, appease the people, stabilize the people's hearts, and provide timely logistical supplies for the soldiers in the front. For the rest, Yang Song can only watch the soldiers in the front fighting bravely and fearlessly. After he guarded the city wall for a few more days, he became firm from the initial panic when he arrived, because he knew the meaning of his coming here. Just like the generals and staff said, behind him is his home, and behind him is his family who needs to be protected. Maybe he joined the army to fight for a background at first, but now he knows who he is fighting for. Not only for the monarch, for the Xia kingdom, but also for himself, for his relatives and close people. Hurry up, put on your equipment, take your weapons, and go up the city wall. The officer's anxious roar spread throughout the barracks. That morning, He was in the military camp, chatting with several comrades who had just finished breakfast. He heard the movement outside the military camp amidst the sound of drums. His heart suddenly tightened, and he secretly said, "Here they come. Brother Lee, are the enemies coming?" Eluowen's face was very ugly, and he asked Lee with an affirmative question. Lee had already started to put on his armor. After putting on his helmet, he tied the short rope under his neck, and hummed in response. He put on his short knife, took his shield and spear, and walked out of the barracks first. Several comrades who were chatting stopped talking, and began to dress silently with serious faces. Not long after, the whole team assembled in front of the barracks. Under the leadership of the team leader Sun Yi, they joined other teams, and then joined other squadrons under the leadership of the squadron leader. He followed the team, and came to the first city wall. The whole team also stood in the designated position. No one gave orders during the whole process. It was all carried out in silence and tacit understanding. It had been rehearsed long ago. The second squad of the 1st Squadron of the 3rd Battalion of the Spearman Formation. This is the organization of his unit. They have to defend a 15-meter long wall. Of course, they are the only squad defending this section of the wall. In front of them, closer to the battlements of the wall, there is a sword and shield squad. A cannon is also placed in front of them, and two heavy shield warriors are firmly guarding both sides. There is a crossbow squad next to them, and there is a strong crossbow squad and an archer squad behind them. Not far away, there is a heavy infantry squad wrapped in armor. In other words, this short 15-meter wall is defended by at least 60 soldiers. Moreover, under the battlements, there is a row of round stone balls, which are arranged along the base of the battlements and directly connected to a drop port. There are also full grenades in the big box behind them, and arrows and crossbow arrows are piled up into a mountain. The cannonballs and gunpowder are placed a little further away. From time to time, there are militia brothers who pile up these supplies higher, as if they are afraid that they will run out. He looked seriously at the dark mass in the distance outside the city. He knew that was the enemy. Today was no longer a drill, but a real battle. To say that he was definitely not nervous or afraid was a lie. But he was a soldier responsible for defending his country. No matter how scared or nervous he was, he had to stand in this place, watching the enemy separate a part of the army to start the attack, and listening to the orders from the general. He somehow became calm, but an unknown anger from his heart rose up at some point. After watching the enemy being driven back by several rounds of artillery and a round of rolling stones, he and his comrades around him breathed a sigh of relief at the same time without realizing it. After the enemy's hasty attack was repelled, the soldiers standing on the top of the city rested in batches. During the rest, Lee sat by the campfire and listened quietly to Luoan and the others talking about the day's battle. Luo Cheng looked very brave and said loudly, "At first I thought what the enemy was like. I didn't expect them to be so resilient. They ran away before we even started to fight. You didn't fight, but I did. I saw those rolling stones. One of them was put there by me." Team leader Sun Yi looked at Luo Cheng and couldn't help but boast. "Captain, I really envy you. Yeah, I also wanted to throw a few grenades to see how powerful they were, but the enemy didn't rush over. Alas. Boy, it's a good thing that you didn't use them. If you really use them, it means that the enemy has run in front of us. Aren't you afraid? I just hope that the enemy will never rush over and will all be killed by cannons and rolling stones." Sun Yi glared at the soldier who said this, then sighed. "You haven't really seen blood yet. Wait, don't talk. I know what you want to say. You just want to say that you have seen dead people today, right? Is that right? Did you do that? Did you see what the enemy looks like?" Sun Yi was about to emphasize the things that should be paid attention to in battle, and saw Luo Cheng was about to speak with an indignant look on his face, so he took this opportunity to suppress these brothers who had already started to be proud before they did anything. Sun Yi was a low-level officer at the bottom of the ranks. He didn't know what it meant to boost morale, but not to let it down. He just wanted these brothers to survive in future battles. Luo Cheng scolded his captain for no reason. Although he lowered his head and said no more, he was still very indignant in his heart. He decided to show himself well when the enemy launched the next attack, so that the captain would know how brave he was. Sun Yi knew that the other party probably didn't listen to his words, but he couldn't ignore these new recruits, so he could only sigh in his heart and continue to explain the precautions for fighting. Chapter 164, Battle of the Two Corners. He listened quietly to the captain's explanation. He thought he was a smart man. Although he was very excited, he still listened quietly and looked at everything in front of him. "Do you know everything?" Sun Yi asked loudly at the end of his explanation. "Got it." The soldiers habitually answered loudly when they heard the question. After Sun Yi asked, he knew that he shouldn't ask. After hearing the brothers' reflexive answers, he had to grin slightly. He looked at He, who had always played the role of a taciturn handsome man among all his men, and asked, "Handsome man, tell me, what do you think about today's battle and the enemy?" Handsome Man is Lee's nickname in the team, and his name can be said to be famous throughout the battalion. Everyone jokingly calls him the face of the whole battalion. This matter has even reached Zhang Wen's ears. Lee was helpless about his nickname. After a period of fruitless struggle, he was forced to figure it out. "You are just jealous of my handsomeness, Lee heard his captain's question to himself, thought about it, didn't say much, and only said one sentence that silenced the whole team. "My sister lives in the central town behind me." Yes. They are all soldiers recruited from ordinary people. They are not soldiers of the infantry brigade alone. They all have their own families, and even most of the soldiers of the infantry brigade now have families. The relatives living inside and behind the pass need their protection. They don't even dare to imagine the result after being broken through here, rather die than retreat. Luo Cheng also thought of his parents and younger brother in Mushao Town. When he thought about letting them get hurt because of fear and cowardice, his body couldn't help but tremble. Rather die than retreat. So he said this sentence to himself in his heart and whispered these 4 words in a hoarse voice. Sun Yi looked at his comrades who had all fallen silent and secretly clenched his fists. Suddenly, he heard something that was a little wrong with Luo Cheng, but he didn't hear it clearly, so he asked, Luo Cheng, what are you talking about? Speak louder. Luo Cheng suddenly raised his head with red eyes and said, I would rather die than retreat. Then, regardless of the expressions of others, he stood up, clenched his fists, looked up at the starry sky, and shouted loudly, I said I would rather die than retreat. I would rather die than retreat. Everyone looked at Luo Cheng's expression and listened to Luo Cheng's shouts, and they were all very surprised that this usually timid Luo Cheng could actually do and say such a thing. Then, everyone stood up, looking at Luo Cheng with their chests rising and falling. Sun Yi agreed, that's right, I would rather die than retreat. You are good today, you are so right. My grandma is still waiting for me at home. I'm the same as you, I would rather die than retreat. A teammate who usually bullied Luo Cheng also patted Luo Cheng's shoulder heavily at this time. Yes, my parents are still waiting for me to go back to a small village next to Gufeng town to marry a wife. I would rather die than retreat. I would rather die than retreat. Finally, everyone roared. Early the next morning, Li He and his men were ready for battle. He watched coldly as the enemy troops outside the pass gathered again, and without any warning, they launched a fierce attack. Prepare for battle. Fire. The roar of the artillery was deafening, and the militia began to move ammunition up and down. Drop rolling stones. As the order to drop rolling stones was issued, all the Malay infantry began to roll rolling stones, pushing the rolling stones behind them to the front, and the rolling stones in front had already been pushed off the city wall. Strong crossbowmen. 3-stage shooting. The strong crossbowmen, archers, and even the crossbowmen beside him all fired their own anger at the outside of the pass. Infantry, prepare to throw grenades. Listening to the officer's order, Li He put down his rifle and carried a large box of grenades with Luo Cheng to the parapet, opened the box, and distributed the grenades. Until now, although these Malay infantrymen have not seen what the enemy looks like, they have also started their own battles, until Malay infantrymen start throwing thunder. After this order was issued, Li He found that the enemy's arrows had already fallen beside him. They were all busy on the city wall, and they could not see or look at the enemy at all. They could only judge that the enemy was not far away, based on the order. Because of the protection of the city wall, even if they were not far away, they could hear the enemies shouting, but it was not until their comrades were injured or killed that they woke up instantly. It turned out that the enemy really came. It turned out that the enemy was really in front of them. It turned out that we were really fighting. Although they were mentally prepared and knew the significance of this battle, in fact, until just now, these new recruits did not have a comprehensive and accurate understanding of the war. The danger of death was closer than ever before. Seeing that the comrades around him were shot by an enemy arrow in the arm without much protection, because of a carelessness, they screamed in pain. Looking at the blood flowing from the shoulder wound, it was even more shocking. But they had no choice. The enemy was going to attack them in this war. For, no matter what, they could only fight desperately. Li He roared, lit the fuse of a grenade, and without even looking outside the city wall, he directly threw the wooden frame of the grenade out, one after another, without stopping. After hearing a series of explosions outside the city, followed by the screams of the enemy, he vented a little. After a long and good training, although Li He and his men were still just new recruits who had never seen blood, even if they had emotions such as fear, and tension, they still persisted and fought in an orderly manner. An orderly battle is not a mess. Each soldier has his own combat position. The crossbowmen will not go back to throw grenades, and the Malay soldiers will not bend their bows and shoot arrows. The battle continued like this. Sun Yi was injured. He was shot in one eye and was carried down the city wall. Luo died bravely in battle. When he was throwing a grenade, he stuck his head out of the wall and was shot in the face by an enemy arrow. In the end, it was discovered that he was shot by an enemy archer. The soldier who was going to go home to marry a wife was also injured, and one ear was gone. Lee was also injured. His face was rubbed by the enemy's arrow, and his handsome face also had a cut. According to the order not to leave the city wall with minor injuries, these soldiers who were only injured in the skin kept holding on to the city wall. But they were really tired. Chapter 165, Battle Corner. After Deaking issued the order for the militia to participate in the battle, the defensive force instantly doubled. There was no change in the attack from a distance, but the enemy troops near the first wall of Cheyenne Pass were blown up by dense grenades. The enemy used their own bodies to build a high slope so that the enemy soldiers behind could finally put the long ladder on the top of the city, although it would be destroyed soon. As long as there is a successful example for the other enemy soldiers behind, it is the hope of promotion and wealth. Soon some lucky long ladders withstood the test, survived the attack of grenades, stood up firmly, and leaned firmly against the top of the wall. Go. As long as you get up, rush up quickly, don't let the enemy destroy the ladder again, hurry up, climb up. An enemy officer commanded the soldiers under heavy protection. Of course, the soldiers of the Zaya Kingdom also noticed these officers, so they attacked them in a targeted manner. Grenades could not be thrown that far, so they could only attack with bows and arrows and crossbows. But the officers were protected by the soldiers around them, so such attacks could only kill some soldiers, and had no effect on the officers. These frontline officers of the enemy army still had a good sense of combat. They knew that, if they stood far away, they would be attacked by artillery, and if they stood close, they would die. So they just stood neither far nor close. Because of the problem of tightness, the artillery could not be fired downward, so they could only use crossbows and bows for precise sniping, but the effect was mediocre. These frontline officers played a very important role in this battle. If it weren't for these officers, the enemy would have fled long ago. This is not. You dare to retreat. An officer watched the soldiers in front of him retreat in fear. After he was discovered, he ordered the soldiers around him, cut the retreating soldier and throw him under the city as a cushion. A soldier held up a shield, blocked the arrows on his head, and walked towards the retreating soldier. He didn't know how many times he had executed such orders, and he was already very skilled. The soldier walked behind the retreating soldier, and chopped off his neck with a knife, and his head and body were separated in an instant. See. If you retreat again, this is the end. The officer once again emphasized the discipline loudly. If you go forward, you still have hope of survival, but if you go backward, you will definitely die. Attack quickly. But the soldier who went to execute the officer's order could never come back, because just after he chopped off his own head, he was killed by a strong crossbow arrow from above his head. Deaking had already seen these officers, and knew their role in the enemy, but he had no good way to deal with them. Grenades could not be thrown dozens of meters away, and arrows were blocked by the enemy soldiers with shields and bodies. It was hard to kill a few through the gaps, but it didn't work. It was still a fight of consumption. Fortunately, with the addition of the militia, the defense power suddenly skyrocketed. Even if the enemy was lucky enough to climb up to the top of the city, they could only be easily killed by the defending Zaya soldiers. The sun hanging high above the head gradually set in the west, and the cruel battle on the earth explained the most primitive rule, the law of the jungle. Although the attack strength of the enemy behind was also slowly declining, it continued without interruption. What finally made them collapse was a part of the enemy forces outside the city, mercenaries. Mercenaries are easy to understand. They sell their fighting power for money, but that doesn't mean they are willing to die for money. Turning around and running away when they see the situation is not right is a common practice. The enemy commander also knows the nature of these mercenaries, so when attacking, all the troops are disrupted, just to prevent these mercenaries from taking the lead in running away. But the enemy commander probably didn't expect that such a thing would happen in the end. Mercenaries are not fools. At the beginning, the mercenaries' ideas were similar to those of Billy and the other three. They thought that with so many people on their side, how could they not win? But as time went on, watching the battle in front of them become more and more cruel, so many people died, but they were still standing still and making no progress. But because these mercenaries were all scattered, even if a person had any ideas, he dared not express them. Those low-level officers didn't care whether you were a mercenary or not. As long as you retreated, you would be treated as a whole. So the mercenaries could only follow the soldiers in front to move forward, but these mercenaries had good survival skills. They used all the tricks, such as splitting one step into 3 steps, taking a detour, and walking diagonally. Moreover, as the battle continued, the number of ordinary soldiers decreased a lot, and the mercenaries had more opportunities to meet each other, and they also had contact with each other. Extra chapter of the experience of Chang San Sheng and Zhao Wu trapped in Shangdao City. A bunch of mercenaries gathered together unknowingly in the chaotic battlefield. How could such a situation be discovered? The mercenaries saw that it was almost done and the number of people was enough to fight, so they nodded to each other and began to shout loudly, "We can't win. We are all going to die. Yes. Run away. The officers behind us have been sending us to death. If we want to escape, we must first kill these officers who are just watching the fun. There are so many people, they don't know who is running away. These soldiers who don't have many ideas are very easy to be instigated, especially when it comes to their own safety. Even if they know it is a lie, they will choose to believe it. Yes, so many people are running away. They will definitely not catch me. I don't want to die yet. After I run away, I just need to hide. Who will know that I ran away? These hateful officers, it's all because of them that I came here to die. I want to kill them." Such thoughts filled the soldiers' minds immediately. In order to survive, the soldiers had long been unable to hold on, but without a leader, they did not dare to be the first one to stand out. Now, there are people who stand out, and there are many of them. The most important thing is that these people are fine. In order to survive, the soldiers at this moment actively, passively, consciously, and unconsciously chose to believe these words. The frontline officers and their personal soldiers were all killed by the soldiers who wanted to survive. They began to flee to the rear. As long as someone blocked them, they would have only one end. D. King looked at the commotion under the city, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. He knew that the enemy could not hold on. He won. As he turned and walked towards the city gate tower, he gave the order in a relaxed manner, "Order the soldiers to continue defending. Also, please ask General Zhang Wei to prepare the cavalry. We are about to start a counterattack." This was the first time that D. King turned around and faced the enemy after the battle today. It was also the first time he left his original place. He was also tired. Chapter 166 Before the counterattack. As for the embarrassing scene of the enemy running for their lives, D. King no longer had the leisure to watch. Although he was also very tired, it was not time to rest yet. Back in the city gate tower, looking at the sand table, D. King thought of the order he had received not long ago occupying the basin outside the pass. Yang Song ordered them in the order that the goal of this war was to occupy the entire northern basin. Now that they have won, it is time to complete the tasks behind. General Zhang, please prepare the cavalry and prepare to counterattack. D. King's guards found Zhang Wei, who was fully armed. Zhang Wei had been ready for a long time and had been listening to the movement outside the city and the fighting on the city head, but he could only stay behind, commanding the cavalry, waiting anxiously. Although he could not leave his post, Zhang Wei could ask his guards to go to the city head to investigate the battle situation. The guards' reports from time to time let Zhang Wei know the crisis on the city head, and he was even ready to let all the cavalry dismount and go to the city. Zhang Wei would immediately go to support as long as D. King gave an order, but he waited for almost a day and still did not wait for D. King's order. Because the highest commander of Qian Pass is D. King, and although he is also a major general, his position is only a cavalry commander, so he cannot act on his own and can only follow orders. Although the situation on the top of the city is not very good, fortunately it has been held, so he can only suppress his inner anxiety and wait calmly. Even when other soldiers on the top of the city are fighting bravely, these cavalrymen can still have a good lunch. Okay, report to General D. The general has already prepared, just waiting for his order. Zhang Wei heard the words he wanted to hear most, not support, but counterattack. D. King's personal guard clasped his fists and accepted the order. Yes. Then he returned to the city gate tower and reported to Deking. General Zhang said he is ready, just waiting for the general's order. Deking heard the report of his personal guard, nodded, walked out of the city gate tower again, came to the battlements of the city wall, looked at the chaotic enemy outside the city, but did not issue an immediate counterattack order. Deking was waiting for the enemy to be in chaos, and also waiting for the best opportunity. It was still a little early to counterattack now, and the enemy was not in such chaos that they could not resist. The enemy's chaos slowly extended from the city wall to the rear of the enemy's formation, directly to the enemy's base camp. Chad was responsible for commanding the army's attack in today's battle, and he also knew how cruel the battle in front was. Because he dispatched troops to attack the city, but there was no response at all, as if there was an insatiable monster in front, swallowing up these troops mercilessly. Although at the end of the day, he only dispatched about 20,000 of the 50,000 troops to the front, and more than half of the soldiers were left behind without moving. But they had no choice but to bite the bullet and continue to send more soldiers to the front. After all the catapults were destroyed, Billy returned to Chat's side to help dispatch the army. At this rate of consumption, the 50,000 troops will be exhausted in less than 2 days. Billy sent an additional 2,000 man army to the attacking team and turned to Chat. Chat also sent a team of 1,000 archers to join the attacking team and replied to Billy, "The enemy can't stand it anymore. Don't you see that the explosive weapons of the enemy have slowed down a lot?" Billy nodded in agreement with Chat's opinion, but he still frowned and said, "That's right, but I don't know if these soldiers can hold on. I'm afraid." Chat knew what Billy meant, sneered, and said, "Don't worry about these soldiers. They dare not run away. Their families are still in the territory." Just as Chat finished speaking, before Billy had time to say what he was thinking, he saw a chaos in front of him. "What's going on?" Billy asked in confusion. Chat also had a face full of questions. Seeing the chaos in front of him, he had a bad feeling in his heart, so he shouted loudly to those around him, "Go and see what happened up ahead. Report." The soldiers on his left and right had just agreed, but before they could move, they heard an officer riding a wildebeest in front of them quickly report. "Report to your lord knight. The soldiers attacking the city in front are retreating and fleeing." "What?" Chat and Billy exclaimed at the same time, and then Chat asked hurriedly, "Aren't they afraid that their entire family will become slaves?" Chat had just told Billy that these soldiers dared not escape, but he didn't expect to be slapped in the face in less than a minute. But now he couldn't care whether he was slapped in the face or not. He looked at the chaos in front of him and hurriedly ordered the soldiers behind to stop the deserters quickly. "If anyone resists, execute them on the spot." "Wait." The officer was about to go forward to pass the order, but was stopped by Billy. He asked, "Where is this knight? And where are those low-ranking officers in front?" These two questions Billy wanted to know the most. It was Ben who stopped the soldiers from escaping and supervised the soldiers to attack the city. Why is there no news now? This knight. He was assassinated by mercenaries. This officer knight is also a knight, but his status is not as high as Billy and the other two. "What?" Chat and Billy exclaimed again at the same time. This time it was even more incredible than the previous one. "Now there is no need to ask, and you know that this riot must have been caused by those mercenaries. And this knight is the victim of this rebellion. As for the officers on the front line, you don't need to think too much to know their outcome: death. Go and pass the message. Also, if you see a mercenary, don't say anything, just kill him." Billy waved at the officer and told him to pass the message quickly. After the officer left quickly, the two looked at each other without saying much, but they felt very heavy in their hearts. They knew that they had lost this battle. Although they knew that they could no longer attack the fortress in front of them, they were not too worried about the enemy because they still had nearly 30,000 troops. As for the enemy's counterattack, they were still happy. As long as the enemy came down from the tall and solid city wall, they would not miss such an opportunity. So what they were worried about was that they would not be able to explain to their respective lords after returning in such a humiliating way. This was a full 50,000 troops. Not only did they not gain anything, but they also lost soldiers and generals, and even lost the first knight of this business territory. With such a big loss, they would probably be very sad when they returned. Chat and Billy were still sending troops to boost the rebellion and worried about their future, but they didn't know that the city wall was ready for a counterattack. What they both don't know is that there is a saying that goes, a defeat is as great as a mountain collapsing. Chapter 167. Counterattack begins. If there hadn't been a counterattack by the Zaya soldiers, the coalition's pressure on the rebellion might not have succeeded, but that was only if. There aren't so many ice in the world, and Deaking couldn't let go of this good opportunity. Deaking watched the enemies killing each other through a monocular telescope, and the cruelty was no less than that of a siege. As for the city wall, there were no enemies. The only remaining ones were some wounded enemy soldiers wailing, and there were only rivers of blood and corpses leaning against the wall. The two sides, who were originally one army, now staged a big drama in front of the original enemy, which was really ridiculous and sad. The fleeing soldiers, led by the mercenaries, didn't want to continue the siege in vain in order to survive, so they could only wave their weapons at their former comrades. The morale of the soldiers on the opposite side was also hit hard. They saw the tragic end of their comrades in front of them, but after all, they had not yet faced the despair in person. So for the sake of their families, they could only obey orders and wave their weapons at these comrades, who made them feel pitiful. On one side were the desperate soldiers who were not afraid of death in battle, but their number was small, only about 5,000. On the other side were the soldiers whose morale plummeted and who were full of sympathy. They were not so decisive when they took action, but their number was large, at least over 20,000. In comparison, although the rebel soldiers were at an absolute disadvantage in terms of numbers, they also reached a stalemate in a short period of time when facing the large coalition forces. Behind the rebel soldiers were the tall and solid walls of the Cheyenne Pass, and on both sides were bottomless cliffs and steep slopes. In front of them were their former comrades who wanted to kill them. They had no way to escape, and could only fight to the death. However, as the casualties of the sympathetic soldiers gradually increased, the coalition forces also became decisive in their actions, and the casualties of the rebel soldiers increased sharply, and their number decreased rapidly. In contrast, the casualties of the coalition forces in front of them were also similar, because they all had the same weapons and equipment, the same soldiers, and they all fought to survive. Seeing that the rebellious party was about to be suppressed, Deaking decisively issued an order. Order the cavalry to attack and start counterattack. Order the artillery to attack quickly and stop shooting after the cavalry rushes close to the enemy formation. Order the soldiers of the guard brigade to continue to defend the city and the soldiers of the infantry brigade to go down the city and line up. After Zhang Wei waited for the order to counterattack, his originally anxious heart suddenly calmed down, and then a wave of excitement rose up. Looking at the slowly opening city gate, his mouth curled up slightly, and he issued an order to attack. Facing the enemy, although his blood was boiling, his mind was still as calm as usual, and he even thought of Zhao Wu, who was far away in Cheyenne City. Thinking back to the beginning, he was just an infantry commander, and Zhao Wu was a cavalry commander. It would be great if it was Zhao Wu who led the cavalry to attack this time. Zhu Cheng was originally a light cavalry squadron leader of the Guard Battalion, but now he is only a light cavalry squadron leader of the infantry brigade. Because the infantry brigade sacrificed 54 soldiers in the last expedition, one of whom was the squad leader of the light cavalry, and Deaking went to the guard camp at that time with the support of Yang Song to select additional soldiers. So he was lucky to be selected and changed to a squad leader of the infantry brigade. It stands to reason that Zhu Cheng's change from a light cavalry squadron leader to a squad leader is equivalent to a demotion, and he should be sad, but in fact he accepted the transfer order very happily, because he knows that the weapons and equipment of the infantry brigade are much better than those of the guard battalion, and the combat effectiveness is much stronger. Not only the difference in artillery and equipment, but also the combat skills and combat experience of the two armies themselves are not at the same level. So Zhu Cheng decisively decided to follow the transfer order. Even if it was a demotion, he was willing. After all, he is also a soldier. As long as he is a soldier, who doesn't want to stay in a unit with explosive combat effectiveness? But fortunately, after he came to the infantry brigade, the salary of the squad leader was almost the same as that of the squadron leader in the guard camp, which made him even more satisfied. Not long ago, when Zhu Cheng learned that the enemy was coming again, he was not afraid, but thought that it was time for him to show his skills and make achievements. Unexpectedly, after a few days, these cavalrymen could only stay under the city, and they didn't even have the chance to watch the excitement. At this moment, Zhu Cheng's long-awaited order to attack finally came. Looking at the slowly opening city gate, his excitement began to rise slowly. The moment the city gate opened, it felt like the entire city gate became smaller and higher, and the higher part was the accumulated corpses of the enemy. Tick-T. Under the leadership of Zhang Wei, Zhu Cheng led a small team, followed the comrades in front, lined up, and rushed out of the city gate in an orderly manner. The moment he left the city, Zhu Cheng saw piles of corpses, and his nose smelled a strong smell of blood. The wounded enemy soldiers lying on the pile of corpses wailed everywhere. Feeling the softness of the horses' hooves stepping on the muddy land soaked in blood, looking down at the small beach, filled with blood splashing everywhere under the horses' hooves, he felt that the whole world turned black and red. Fortunately, the city wall was built on a slope, otherwise so much blood would probably gather at the foot of the city wall to form a moat made of blood. Dang dang dang. This is the sound of the war drum that has never stopped since the war began. Woo woo woo. This is the familiar sound of the horn. This sound represents an attack. Da da da. This is the sound of the mighty warhorse galloping on the land, and it is also the good news of counterattack. Listening to all kinds of business in his ears, Zhu Cheng felt that this was a triumphant song composed of death, blood, glory, and victory. The general has given the order. Start the charge. Prepare the crossbows. Draw your swords. After 2,000 cavalrymen formed a battle formation outside the city, Zhang Wei gave the order to charge. The charge formation is an arrow formation. The arrows composed of 350 heavy cavalrymen will easily break through the enemy's formation and crush the enemy with overwhelming force. The entire cavalry charge formation is like a person, slowly accelerating until it reaches the speed of the charge. They will launch the most violent attack on the enemy. At this moment, the enemy is still killing each other, and the coalition forces are still clearing out and suppressing the last bit of rebellious soldiers. The soldiers of the coalition looked at the cavalry in front of them, as if they came from the sky, feeling the trembling of the earth, and their hearts trembled with it. The charge up and down, the order that seemed to be one body, carrying an invincible momentum, made the enemy feel only despair. Chapter 168, Escape. On the slope outside the first wall of Shianqian Pass, the rebel soldiers were surrounded by the coalition army, and only less than 300 soldiers were left to make the final resistance. It was at this juncture that the cavalry of the Xia kingdom rushed to the enemy. Order the crossbow to fire 3 volleys. Zhang Wei looked at the enemy who was gradually approaching the range of the crossbow, and gave the order decisively. Woo woo woo. The specific rhythm of the horn made all the cavalrymen who had been trained for a long time understand what kind of attack order this was. Zhang Wei was in the middle of the cavalry charge formation. He was not a fierce general who charged into battle, but a commander who planned and planned. During the charge of more than 2,000 cavalrymen, he was responsible for commanding the movement trajectory and attack direction of the entire cavalry battle formation. Among these more than 2,000 cavalrymen, the cavalrymen belonging to the infantry brigade, in addition to the 350 heavy cavalrymen who rushed to the front, were 566 light cavalrymen equipped with crossbows and swords, which were arranged on both wings of the battle formation. In the middle of the battle formation was a light cavalry battalion belonging to the guard brigade, with 1,100 light cavalrymen, plus Zhang Wei and his 108 guards. The entire attacking battle formation had a total of 2,125 people. 3 rapid shots from the crossbow. Attack. After seeing the enemy enter the range of his crossbow, Ren Xian gave the order to attack. Ren Xian was the captain of the light cavalry battalion of the infantry brigade. At this time, he was commanding 566 light cavalrymen belonging to the infantry brigade. While he gave the order, he raised the crossbow in his right hand, that had been loaded long ago, and took the lead, in shooting 3 crossbow arrows with sharp whistles. After these 3 crossbow arrows were shot, they were accompanied by high and sharp whistles, so that all the soldiers knew that this was the order to shoot. Ren Xian's order could not be spread too far during the charge, and there was no room for the messenger to convey the order. Only in this way Could the soldiers in the distance know the specific attack order? The remaining 500 light cavalrymen equipped with crossbows followed the whistle and fired their crossbow arrows, firing deadly crossbow arrows at the enemy. Each light cavalryman fired 3 crossbow arrows, and the 566 light cavalrymen fired a total of 1,689 crossbow arrows. These 1,600 crossbow arrows covered the front row of the enemy formation, and a large number of the front row of the enemy fell down immediately. Even if they had shields, it was useless. With such a rapid attack, the enemy had no time to react and was it. The light cavalrymen who had fired the crossbow arrows did not need to give more orders. They had already put down their crossbows, drew their swords, and prepared for the attack. The heavy cavalrymen who served as arrows in front had already set up the heavy lances used by the heavy cavalry, lowered their bodies, and rushed into the enemy army in an instant. Under the fierce and violent attack of the heavy cavalry, the enemy soldiers standing in the front row were instantly knocked away. When they landed, most of their bones had been shattered, especially their chests, which were all obviously dented. More than 1,000 light cavalrymen at the back also set up their spears and followed the heavy cavalrymen in front to charge into the enemy formation. The entire cavalry formation, which was charging at high speed, directly penetrated the enemy's nearly 20,000 strong army formation amid the booming sound of the earth, and in the face of the enemy's horrified expression, and directly pierced through the enemy's army formation. The cavalrymen who had pierced through the enemy formation reorganized behind the enemy, and in less than a moment, they pierced through the enemy formation again from behind the enemy. The location of each penetration was different. During the second charge, because it was closer to the edge of the cliff, some of the enemies were even squeezed off the cliff alive after the cavalry formation charged past. In this way, in less than 2 rounds, the enemy army collapsed. Although there were still many people, they really didn't want to face this terrible army again. As for the enemy's rebellious army, they had been annihilated by the cavalry at this time. The cavalry of the Zaire Kingdom didn't care which side you were from. As long as you were not the army of the Zaire Kingdom, you would be annihilated. After the cavalry once again broke through the enemy's formation from behind, the enemy all collapsed. No matter what means the knights and officers used, they could not change the reality of defeat. The enemy who lost the will to fight and only knew how to escape was no threat. Now even if there was only a small team of soldiers chasing behind them, these enemies who only wanted to escape and survive would not turn around and fight back. This is the so-called defeat. As long as the soldiers of the Zaire Kingdom pursued the enemy to a limited extent behind them, the enemy would not stop running for their lives. Report to the General. General Zhang requests to pursue the enemy. A messenger came to report. Deking was on the tower at this moment, watching the enemy fleeing under the impact of the Zaire Kingdom's iron cavalry. After hearing this, he immediately replied, permitted to pursue, but not to attack the city easily. Yes. After receiving the order, the messenger quickly went to convey the order, and Deking continued to stand on the top of the city and watch the enemy's figure gradually disappear. When it became quiet outside the city, he turned back to the city gate tower and asked Lusu, who was following him as he walked, have the soldiers been arranged? Lusu replied, don't worry, General, the food has been prepared, and the militia will bring it up soon. Look, it's the food. As Lusu said this, he saw the militia carrying hot meals to the city wall, and some people distributed them to the soldiers one by one, so that these tired soldiers could eat delicious meals without much effort. After the cavalry attacked, Deking asked Lusu to arrange meals and let the soldiers who had been fighting for a long time rest on the spot. These soldiers who had been fighting for a day finally heard that they could rest at this time, and they all sat down on the spot. Whether it was the ammunition box or other places, there were exhausted soldiers. Although the soldiers were resting, they all retained a sense of vigilance. Deking didn't need to say much about such a minimum precaution. The soldiers of the guard brigade were resting on the city wall. The soldiers of the infantry brigade who were preparing to respond in the city also rested on the spot after receiving the order to rest. No matter what happened today, these infantrymen could not be dispatched again. Even if they wanted to counterattack, they had to wait until the next day. So after agreeing to Zhang Wen's pursuit request, Deking also added an order not to attack the city easily. This was to prevent Zhang Wen from attacking the city with cavalry without knowing the importance of the matter. Cavalry is not a type of soldier used for attacking the city. Only after the arrival of professional infantry can the enemy's city be occupied. After Zhang Wei got permission, he immediately led the light cavalry to pursue, and the heavy cavalry that could not be used for pursuit could only return to the Qian Pass. When chasing, as long as they caught up with the lagging enemy, no matter whether they wanted to surrender or not, they would be killed without leaving a single one. And such a fierce attitude made the enemy in front escape faster. The performance of the enemy when fleeing can be fully reflected in one word: throwing away armor. Weapons and equipment are a big hindrance during the escape. In this situation where running slowly means death, everything that hinders their escape speed is thrown away. Throwing away as they escape. Zhang Wei led the cavalry to pursue the enemy slowly. Along the way, they saw all kinds of abandoned weapons and equipment everywhere. Chapter 169 Return to the small town. General, the city of Bir is ahead. The scout of the light cavalry came to report to Zhang Wei. After a day of pursuit, Zhang Wei led the cavalry to the nearest city to Qian Pass, Bir City. He had long been looking forward to this small city that dared to take the lead in provoking the Xia Kingdom. This was Zhang Wei's first time to come to this territory that everyone in the Xia Kingdom knew. Oh, this is Bir City? This general is very familiar with its name. Seeing it today, it is indeed unique. Zhang Wei sighed as he looked at the dilapidated city. He looked at the city in front of him. At this time, Bir City was no longer a city. The two lost walls were full of dilapidated houses. There was no appearance of a city at all. Instead, it looked more like a slum. If it weren't for the conspicuous castle in the middle of the city, Zhang Wei would have thought he had found the wrong place. After Kevin was defeated and released, although he returned to his castle, the city that was burned down had no money or no one to repair even his dilapidated castle, let alone the city defense facilities. He had no choice but to take the treasures that were well hidden to his son-in-law in exchange for some support, which saved him from the tragic fate of being starved to death. As for such a huge project as the city wall, he did not have the ability to restore it, so until now the original city walls on the east and south sides of the city are still in ruins. Seeing this city without any defense facilities, Zhang Wei immediately decided to attack the city. He decisively and simply ordered the whole army loudly, attack. Under the command of the horn, the cavalry decisively launched an attack on the city without two walls. Although the king ordered him not to attack the city easily, it was not easy now, but a real practical need. Moreover, this city was no longer a city, at most it was a gathering place with a castle, and even attacking it would not be considered a violation of orders. According to Zhang Wei's order, the cavalry began a new round of attack, and the cavalry easily jumped over the ruins of the city wall and entered the city. With the collapse of the inferior houses, the few civilians left in the city screamed. In fact, there were only some civilians who could not escape in Bir City at this time, and the others were some fleeing enemy soldiers who had just arrived. A few days ago, when the coalition arrived, all the civilians in and around the city who could run away ran away, and they fled with a few most important food for them. They did not want to return to the situation 2 years ago again, although it was useless. The various armies of the coalition forces had different orders of arrival because of their different distances from Bir City. However, these soldiers of the coalition did not have good discipline, and this was not their hometown, so they came recklessly, and the civilians here suffered. Fortunately, the civilians had experienced all kinds of hardships in this remote territory, and had already prepared to escape, so in less than a day, the whole city became empty, and only some old and sick people who could not escape were left. Now, when Zhang Wei enters the city, it will be easy without the difficulty of coming in the wild. After Zhang Wei understood the general situation of this place, he frowned and ordered, "Keep going, target Fitch City in the north." Fitch City is a small territory located in the north of Bir City. It belongs to the Fitch family, and is also the territory of one of the only 2 lords captured by the Xia Kingdom. The only captured lord is named Anton Fitch. He is a young man with a timid personality. It is unknown how such a personality was cultivated. The situation in Fitch City is similar to that in Bir City. At that time, in order to meet the caravan trapped in the north, the king ordered the remaining precious ammunition to be used to blow up the 4 walls of the city, in order to be on the safe side and to prevent the return route from being cut off like the caravan. In D King's view, this is just a tactical implementation, but in the view of Lance Lane, the Lord of Lane territory, this situation is a retaliatory attack made by the army of the Xia Kingdom after the Lord Entenfich did not accept the surrender conditions of the Xia Kingdom. This also led to the active surrender of the Lord of Lance behind him, but in the eyes of D King and others, this situation was also a good mistake. Now D King was still commanding the army in the back, and the one who came here was Zhang Wei. He looked at the gathering place without the city wall in front of him, and chose to attack. Although Zhang Wei had never been outside the pass, he knew the situation outside the pass very well, because as a commander of an army, understanding the enemy was the most basic ability. This was also the reason why he did not choose the other two territories after attacking the city of Bil, but chose the territory in the north. Zhang Wen's pursuit this time was not only to attack the remaining forces of the enemy, but also to occupy more cities. He wanted to use this attitude to show that, even if he was commanding a cavalry, Zhang Wei could still attack the city and capture the stronghold. Zhang Wei was not weaker than others. Yang Song acquiesced to normal competition like this, and he even encouraged it, as long as it did not affect the overall situation. From a management perspective, only a system with a competitive mechanism is a benign system, otherwise it will make the people below lose the desire to work hard. That's why Zhang Wei dared to do this on the battlefield. Although Li King always treated Zhang Wei as an equal on the surface, he really didn't think much of Zhang Wei in his heart before. But now Zhang Wei has become a brigade commander with the rank of Major General at the same level as him. It would be a lie to say that he has no pressure in his heart. This is the result Yang Song wanted. Although Zhang Wei used cavalry to occupy two cities, he still knew that this situation was due to historical reasons. He did not expand to the point of thinking that he was invincible. He still had self-knowledge. This is Zhang Wei's greatest advantage. So he did not attack other cities with complete city walls, but continued to clean up the fleeing and scattered enemy soldiers in the wild. Zhang Wei has now performed what he should perform, and the rest of the work is the work of the infantry behind. In fact, what Zhang Wei didn't know was that there was only an empty city left in the other two small territories. Because most of the civilians in the city fled from the city before the cavalry arrived, they still remembered the miserable situation in the previous 2 years. In fact, after these civilians learned that the coalition forces were going to attack the southern territory again, they had been worried and even prepared to flee at any time. At this time, they learned from the soldiers who escaped from the south that the coalition forces had been defeated. Those terrible armies had won again, and they were about to suffer again. In these two cities, whether it was the extremely frightened civilians or the terrified dignitaries and forces, they all fled their homes. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 170, Continue to fight back. So now even if Zhang Wei led the cavalry to attack the city, there would be no hindrance. Unfortunately, he didn't know this. In such a chaotic battlefield, even the intelligence personnel of Xia Kingdom could not convey the enemy's intelligence to the places where they were needed in a timely and accurate manner. This information has been reported to Xianqi City at this time. The information reported by Chen Ping a few hours ago contained information about the enemy's territory, including the details of the residents in the enemy's city. But at that time, the Xianqian Pass was in a fierce battle, and the coalition forces outside the pass were not defeated and fled, so the residents in the city had not fled yet. Only in the intelligence sent back, it was noted that the residents in the city of the hostile forces were ready to leave the city. As for the 7 lords, they were lucky enough to stay in the Shangdao territory, and nothing happened. It was precisely because these lords were not in their respective cities that these civilians and dignitaries could escape the city so easily. And now the latest information about the cities outside the pass is on the way to the Xianqian Pass, and it is still flying quickly in the sky. Although Yang Song knew the enemy's dynamics at the first time, he couldn't pass such intelligence to the front line immediately, and could only secretly say it was a pity. Yang Song couldn't help but miss the era of ever-changing information in the past. If possible, Yang Song also wanted to enter the information age immediately, but he could only think about it in dream. In fact, Yang Song also considered going to the front line in person to provide timely, accurate and effective intelligence information to the commanders on the battlefield, but he also knew that this was unrealistic. He is a monarch, not a general who charges into battle. This is a sentence he often reminds himself. Yang Song can't distract the commander-in-chief of the battle because of his participation, so he won't participate in occasions like the hot-blooded battlefield. Qian Pass is the first barrier of Xia State, and it is also the most important and powerful defense, but not the last defense. Because the last defense is Yang Song himself. If he participates in the frontline war, if there is a chance, the newly established Xia State will fall apart immediately. In this world, it is not an exaggeration to say that the country will be extinct. He knew that what Xia Guo had done before was all taboo in the eyes of the civilization of this world. If he was not the leader of the monarch, facing the countless enemies of this world, the result could be imagined. So Yang Songming knew that his participation would bring the support of a guard team and provide the commander with timely, accurate and effective intelligence information, and he would not go to the front battlefield. Zhang Wei cleaned up the field while waiting for King to arrive. He didn't wait long. In less than 5 days, King led the remaining soldiers to the outside of Ryan City and met with Zhang Wei. The Qian Pass was boldly handed over to the militia for defense. There was no threat to the Qian Pass now. Even if there was, with the assistance of 27 city defense artillery, it could hold on until the return of the outgoing army. So King led the remaining more than 5,000 soldiers and 10,000 militia responsible for auxiliary support, left the pass, and came to the small city. Ryan City is a city in a territory located northwest of Qian Pass. The lord is Lance Ryan, who was also the lord who voluntarily handed over 100,000 kilograms of grain in the last war. At this time, there were nearly 20,000 troops gathered outside Ryan City, but the city was empty. General Zhang, there is no one defending the city now, we just need to occupy it. Lu Su told Zhang Wei the latest information after the meeting. Zhang Wei regretted for a while after learning that there were 2 empty cities waiting for him to occupy, but he did not occupy them. But he only regretted for a while. He soon figured out that he could not blame himself for this situation, and could only say that it was time and fate. Then after resting in the empty Ryan City for a night, the army set off again, and their destination was Shangdao territory. The march was unimpeded, and after 2 days of marching, the entire army arrived at the first city that Xia Guo had seen in this world outside Shangdao City. At this moment, the castle of Shangdao City was already noisy. I told you not to provoke them, but you still don't believe me. Are we in trouble now? The young Lord Anton Fitch said to himself in a low voice in the hall. Although he only said, don't provoke them in his heart, he never really refuted other lords. Anton Fitch was originally a bit timid. After being captured, he became even more timid. He even had the idea of surrendering, because he had experienced the feeling of hunger. Don't be afraid, lords. This is the Shangdao city of Shangdao territory. It is not comparable to those small cities in the south. As long as there are capable lords, they will never let the enemy attack. Although Cassie Cave's words made the 4 small lords in the south very unhappy, they did not refute it, because they still needed to rely on the protection of the other party. Because they did not dare to confront him, and they were not sure whether this city could really resist the attack of the fierce and terrible enemy. So the 4 little lords could only stay aside quietly, watching the other 3 lords of the powerful territories discuss. Lord Charlie Quill asked Lord Cave seriously, Lord Cave, can this city really be defended? It's no wonder Quill was skeptical, because he knew that there were not many soldiers available in Shangdao City now. In his opinion, in addition to the few soldiers left to defend the city, there were only the soldiers who escaped back one after another, so he asked this question. Moreover, his Boenta had no soldiers to reinforce, just as he said, before he sent out the troops, he really sent out all the soldiers guarding the city gate. When Cave heard Quill's question, he smiled confidently, raised his fat head high, and replied arrogantly, Lord Quill, you may have forgotten that there is a very powerful army in my territory. Mykos held the wine glass, drank the wine with a sad face, and listened to the conversations of others. His ambition was completely eliminated after this war. At this time, Mike did not look like he was planning and strategizing before the troops were sent out. You know, this coalition can be said to be promoted by him, which made Yang Song, who was far away in the south, feel that he had done something unjust. Yang Song had never done anything to abolish the eldest and establish the young. Although he had stayed overnight in the Dragon Palace, he slept in his own bed. How could he attract the coalition outside the pass to attack? Although the coalition only had 7 lords, not 18 princes. So when Mike heard that Cave still had a chance to turn defeat into victory, his once extinguished ambition was rekindled again. Chapter 171 Attacking the City. When Mike heard what Cave said, he suddenly remembered the special features of the other party's territory. He asked Cave in shock and expectation, "Sir Cave, you are not going to withdraw the troops from the Hatan Tauhei fortress in the north for defense, are you?" "Hahaha, Sir Oz is still so wise." Cave laughed and replied to the shocked Mike, and then said to everyone present very proudly, "Although the Hatan Tauhei fortress in the north is very important, this lord has communicated with the Lord of Nanshan territory outside the fortress, Viscount Lanny Parker." Cave saw that many lords were looking at him expectantly. He coughed and continued, "This lord has explained the situation of our Hatan Tauhei basin to Viscount Parker. Although Viscount Parker did not send troops to support, he also made a promise to this lord that he would not invade during this period." After Mike and the others knew about the situation in the north, they were still very happy. Although the other party did not send troops to support, it was not bad to have this guarantee. Looking at the expressions of the crowd, Cave smiled slightly and raised his glass, saying, "As you all know, the Hatan Tauhei fortress is stationed with my most elite army. They are all very good at defense, and there are also heavy infantry and crossbows for defense. With such an army, you don't have to worry about whether this city can be defended." When Quill heard that there was support from this army, he was relieved and laughed and praised, "Lord Cave is really very smart. No wonder he is so good at making money." "Yes, Lord Cave is really smart." Charlie Big immediately followed up with praise. Charlie Big was the lord of the territory who first proposed surrender in the last war, and he also started the custom of surrendering 100,000 kilograms of grain. In order to obtain the support of the Shangdao Lord Cave, he ran to Shangdao City several times in 2 years. If he didn't have the support of Shangdao Lord, he wouldn't have such a good life. It can be said that he is the lord who has the best life among the 4 small territories. Of course, this has a lot to do with the reason why he shamelessly asked for support. Haha, don't worry. Cave enjoyed the praise from the lords. In fact, Cave participated in this event so actively because he had his own plans. In his opinion, as long as he could survive this time, the area south of Hatan Tauhei fortress would be his own. Quill participated in order to expand his territory because his territory was all in the mountains. Although it was large, there was no place to farm, and hunting alone could not provide him with much wealth. Mike was for his own ambition. He also wanted to become a force like the Zaya Kingdom in the south, or even bigger and stronger. Report to the Lord. The enemy outside the city is shouting for us to surrender. An officer came to the hall and reported to Cave, who was chatting and laughing in the hall. "Everyone, the enemy wants us to surrender. Should we surrender?" "No need." Cave heard the report from his subordinates and laughed. "Tell the enemies outside the city to attack at will. This lord will not surrender." Report to the general. The artillery position has been deployed. The messenger reported to Deking. Deking rode on a warhorse, holding a monocular telescope, and looking at the defense on the top of the city. After hearing the report from the messenger, he ordered Lu Su seriously, "Send someone to persuade them to surrender first." "Yes, I'll let the intelligence personnel with the army go." After receiving the order, Lu Su went to arrange specific personnel. Deking watched a man rush out of the city and began to shout loudly. He simply explained to Zhang Wei, who was a little confused on his left, "We in the Zaya Kingdom pay attention to courtesy before force." Zhang Wei nodded in understanding after hearing Deking's explanation, and then picked up the monocular telescope to look at the movement on the top of the city. However, he didn't think it was a waste of time. Sure enough, not long after, the intelligence personnel who shouted for surrender came back and reported, "General, the enemy refused to surrender and told us to attack at will." They will not surrender. Well, I know. Deking nodded to the intelligence personnel, turned around and ordered loudly, "Beat the war drum." Dong dong. The familiar sound of the war drum let the soldiers of the Xia kingdom know that this was a signal to start a war. The enemy also knew that this was the sound of the Xia army starting to attack. Fire. With a command, the artillery that had been prepared for a long time bombarded the enemy's city wall. The city wall of Shangdao City is very different from the walls of the other 4 small cities. Although it is also built with stone slabs, it is much taller and stronger. The city wall of Beer City is only 5 or 6 meters high, while the city wall of Shangdao City is 8 or 9 meters high, and the corresponding thickness is much thicker. Therefore, Deking saw that the attack of more than 100 artillery pieces did not have much effect. The actual shells bombarded the city wall and could only collapse some rubble. After several rounds of bombardment, Shangdao City had no other results except that the city gate was blasted open, which made Deking frown fiercely. This is really a strong city. Lu Su was very moved when he saw that the bombardment had no effect. He touched his beard and turned to Deking and suggested, "General, it seems that this city cannot be captured in a short time. I suggest setting up camp first and waiting for the opportunity to fight." Lu Su's suggestion was because they started to deploy troops as soon as they arrived at this place and had no plan to confront each other. Deking relaxed his frown and agreed, "Okay, let's stop here today." Then he ordered loudly, "Retreat. Set up camp 5 kilometers back." The reason why Deking frowned was because they could not open up the situation immediately. This was the first time that the Xia army's attack was blocked. In the past, the situation was not opened up immediately. The situation of being forced to retreat and set up camp, like now, has never happened. In addition to giving Deking a step to retreat, Lu Su's suggestion also made him think it through. In his opinion, it was only a matter of time before they broke through the city, and he was about to complete Yang Song's second task, so he didn't need to rush. As long as they broke through the city and occupied the checkpoint in the north, the large piece of land in the south would belong to the Xia kingdom, and Deking would take this opportunity to move up a level, gain more honors, and consolidate his position in the heart of the monarch. Under Deking's order, the entire army began to retreat, leaving the outside of Shangdao City, and began to set up camp in an open space 5 kilometers away. In the castle hall of Shangdao City, after hearing the deafening sound of artillery, these lords began to worry whether the city could really be defended. Even Kev began to worry. Although he knew that the enemy had a weapon with great sound and power, he didn't expect the sound to be so loud that even the castle in the middle of the city 2 kilometers away could hear the attack of the enemy outside the city. But it didn't take long for an officer to report that the enemy had retreated and set up camp 5 kilometers outside the city. When Cave asked about his losses again, he was very happy with the report he received. It turned out that the city gate was destroyed, several houses in the city were damaged, and more than a dozen people were killed or injured, but there was no other damage. Chapter 172 Attack on the Mall. Ha ha ha. After hearing the report from his subordinates, Cave was relieved and laughed heartily. Charlie Biggs praised him at the right time. "Congratulations to Lord Cave for repelling the enemy's attack. We don't have to worry anymore." After hearing this, Cave was even more happy and said, "Haha, that's right. As long as my business city is there, you don't have to worry. My castle is the safest place." "Thank you, Lord Cave. I will definitely remember your help." Antinfich timidly praised. He saw that his neighbor to the east got a lot of benefits because of a few flattery, and he also wanted to try it because he was really in a difficult situation. Antinfich was the only city whose walls were destroyed on all 4 sides. He was also the only lord who had been captured by the enemy, and another one had died. It was difficult for him to live normally, and now you don't have to think about what his territory is like. How will he live in the future? So he tried to see if he could get some benefits. He didn't want to feel hungry again. Then, there were many lords who thought like Antinfich. Lord Cave is wise and brave. This was Lance Ryan's praise. Baron Cave should be a viscount after this time. This was Lily Bill's praise. Although she still had a barren husband, she also wanted to get help on her own. In the end, even Quill and Mike praised Cave. For a moment, Cave was the center of the hall and the protagonist of the party. Cave responded with a laugh. He seemed to have seen the moment when he was promoted to Viscount. "Colonel Lu, is our army's ammunition supply sufficient?" Deking asked Lu Su. After Deking ordered the troops to retreat and set up camp, he had been thinking about how to break through the city in front of him. It was already that night when he asked this question. Deking sat on the upper seat of the main tent of the newly established camp. The reason he asked this question was that he had already thought about how to break the city. "General, please rest assured about the logistics supply. The militiamen in the rear are continuously delivering ammunition supplies." Lu Su sat in the first seat on the lower left. After hearing Deking's question, he stood up and clasped his fists in reply. Zhang Wei sat in the first seat on the lower right of Deking. He also wanted to hear what tricks Deking had to break the city. Deking nodded with satisfaction and said, "Very good, I will tell you how to break the enemy city." As he spoke, he looked around at the many officers present and said, "It's very simple, that is, to flood the enemy city with artillery shells. It's not so exaggerated to say that it's flooded. Everyone understands what Deking means. He means to keep bombarding the enemy city with artillery until it collapses." Deking actually thought about rushing in from the enemy's city gate, using infantry to seize the city wall, and then nibbling away the city step by step, but in this way, the casualties of the infantry are bound to be great, which is not in line with the direction of Zaya's army building. This traditional siege method is suitable for situations where the technology of the two armies is not much different. If the Zaya kingdom did not have the artillery, perhaps there would be many more siege equipment from the cold weapon era in the military camp now, such as catapults/machines, battering rams, ladders, and wells, although it is still very advanced in this place. Since there is a technological advantage, in order to avoid unnecessary casualties, Deking chose this time-consuming and material-consuming tactics. There are very few warriors in the Zaya kingdom, only more than 8,000. These soldiers who can be called warriors are professional soldiers, and their combat effectiveness is not comparable to that of militiamen who have only undergone some basic training. Although these professional soldiers are not afraid of head-on confrontation, now that our side has such a big advantage, why should we give up our strengths? Just like the cavalry, the existing cavalry in the Zaya kingdom only plays a role of supplementing the army, not forming an army alone. According to the army's arms setting, the cavalry is actually only a secondary arm. But even so, in order to maximize the practical power in his hands, Deking singled out all the cavalry and let Zhang Wei, the general of a brigade, lead this separate cavalry unit. Deking asked Zhang Wei to lead the cavalry, not only because Zhang Wei, the major general, had nowhere to be placed, but more to give full play to the limited combat power of the entire army. Whether it is containment, harassment, or pursuit, the role of cavalry alone is very large. In this case, we can see the huge difference between an ordinary general and these famous generals. Ordinary generals command to use the power in their hands step by step, while famous generals like Deking will use the power in their hands. The infantry brigade is not so simple to use only infantry, and the guard brigade is not so simple to defend. Even the commander of an army can become a force in his hands. After a night of rest, the Zaya soldiers came to the outside of Shangdao city again in high spirits, and deployed their troops 1 kilometer away from the city. All the artillery was pulled out, and arranged into 2 rows of artillery positions in front of the entire army. The field artillery was filled with shrapnel shells, and the siege artillery was filled with solid bullets. In the familiar sound of the fire command, all of them bombarded the walls of Shangdao city. Field artillery attacks the top of the city and the inside of the city, mainly targeting the enemy soldiers. Siege artillery bombards the city walls. The two have clear division of labor and cooperate with each other to break through the enemy city. Because there was an order in advance that today's bombardment does not need to be too fast, all the artillery fired at a fixed frequency. Because of this, as long as the artillery is cooled down in time after each firing, it can continue to attack for a long time. Unlike in normal field battles, it is desperately speeding up the firing rate. Although there is a strong firepower attack in a short period of time, it will not last long, and will need to cool down for a long time. Don't underestimate the power of black powder. The temperature of black powder can reach more than 1000 degrees Celsius in an instant, and the volume of the gas produced by combustion can expand to nearly 10,000 times the original volume. Although it is not as powerful as TNT, it should not be underestimated. Deaking ordered the field artillery to attack the soldiers on the top of the city, and another purpose was to drive the enemy troops on the enemy wall off the top of the city so that he could let the artillery get close to the wall. After getting close, they drilled holes, filled them with gunpowder, and ignited them. Finally, with a loud noise, a section of the city wall flew into the sky, and the rest was easy. This goal was just Deaking's backup plan. He still expected the siege artillery to be very powerful. After 2 days of siege, there was no trace of the enemy on the city wall, and the siege artillery did not disappoint Deaking. After concentrating 36 siege artillery to attack a section of the city wall, the solid city wall could not withstand such a high intensity bombardment and collapsed. Siege artillery used their power to let the world know that its name was not taken randomly. It lived up to the name of siege. Chapter 173, Besieging the City and Attacking the Reinforcement. The dust from the collapse of the city wall spread quickly, and the Zaire army outside the city also saw clearly that this section of the collapsed city wall was more than 100 meters long. The gap was located on the right side of the city gate. The city walls in this world did not have a gate tower. The city gate was a hole in the city wall. With a gap in the city wall, it would be much easier to expand the scope of the gap later. As long as we continue to attack the city walls on the left and right of the gap, it would be very easy to trample it. This is the so-called 1,000-mile embankment is destroyed by an anthole. What's more, this is not just a small anthole, but a gap of more than 100 meters. After collapsing this section of the city wall, the siege artillery did not stop, but continued to bombard the walls on both sides that did not collapse, expanding this gap. Don't stop the siege artillery, keep attacking. After seeing the enemy's city wall being bombarded section by section, Deaking did not order an attack, but let the siege artillery continue to attack. Since Deaking knew that the enemy had a fortress, he would definitely take precautions in advance. How could the Zaire kingdom not know about such a large fortress in the north? Especially after learning from the intelligence personnel that all the soldiers stationed in the fortress were the enemy's elite, it was impossible to relax their vigilance in this regard. The arrival of the enemy's reinforcement was also discovered by the Zaire scouts. Deaking and Lu Su saw that they could not break through the enemy city within 1 or 2 days, so they discussed and decided to implement a siege. This tactic was first proposed by Lu Su, the staff officer. After Deaking nodded in agreement, Zhang Wei would implement it. Specifically, the attack on the enemy's south city was changed to the attack on the enemy's west city, which was convenient for changing the direction of attack at any time. Then let the cavalry line up outside the north city, pretending to block the enemy's reinforcement, so that the enemy in the city knew that the Zaire kingdom had already known that they had reinforcement. Then let the main soldiers outside the west city lurk in the north at night and ambush on both sides of the road. In order to let the enemy know that the army outside the west city was the main force of the Zaire kingdom, the militia was lined up outside the city, while also protecting the 36 siege artillery. As for the field artillery, after attacking the enemy's city for a day, the enemy dared not go up to the city again, and even the gunpowder on the city wall was buried, so these artillery were also transferred to the northern road to set up an ambush. The last thing left was to wait for the enemy's elite reinforcement to come. This tactic was proposed by Lu Su. According to Lu Su's words, let the cavalry pretend to block the enemy's reinforcement under the enemy's nose in order to comfort the enemy's reinforcement. The reinforcement would not be too vigilant, thinking that the Zaire kingdom was only using cavalry to stop them, and the other soldiers were still outside the city, so they would not expect that there would be another wave of ambushes on the way. After all, the reinforcement were the enemy's elite, and the necessary preparations should be made. The lion fights the rabbit with all its strength. Deaking and his men did not want to fail in the last step, because of pride and complacency. So in order to prevent any eventuality, the gunpowder buried at the root of the wall became the last backhand for the final attack on the enemy city. Although it was a bit troublesome, with multiple preparations, no matter what happened to the enemy, Deaking and his men had ways to deal with it. They were full of confidence in occupying the city. Sure enough, the ambush was completed that night, and when dawn came, the enemy's reinforcement arrived as expected. Reporting to General Zhang, General D has an order. Dawn operation begins. The dawn operation mentioned in the messenger's order to Zhang Wei was the name D King gave to this plan. This operation is not just about besieging the city and attacking the reinforcement, but also a series of actions to follow. After receiving the instructions to start the operation, Zhang Wei immediately ordered all cavalry, start moving forward. The cavalry also lined up an arrow formation for attack outside the north city. The position was not due north, but to the west outside the enemy's north city, so Zhang Wei pointed the arrows of this arrow formation to the east. In this way, whether it was the enemy rushing out of the city or the enemy's reinforcement, he could easily deal with it. The heavy cavalry continued to lead the way, and turned around. All the cavalry ran out of the city in an arc, facing the Shangdao city with their backs, and charged the enemy troops coming to the north from the Shangdao city. The night of the enemy reinforcement army led 10,000 elite infantrymen, and after turning a corner, he could see the wall of Shangdao city. But when he turned the corner, he saw a cavalry charging towards them. Retreat to the bend and form a formation for defense. The knight immediately ordered the army to retreat and form a formation for defense behind the bend. From the knight's order, it can be seen that he is a commander who is good at defense. After retreating to the bend and forming a formation for defense, not only can the soldiers not intuitively experience the shock of the cavalry charge, but also use this bend to reduce the impact speed of the enemy cavalry. This order can be said to kill two birds with one stone. However, the knight did not expect that. Although he was smart, he did not know that all his actions were calculated clearly by the commander and staff of the Xia Kingdom. Because the commander in charge of the fortress defense must be a good defender, so after seeing the cavalry charge, he will definitely use this bend to defend. In this way, the support army fell completely into the hands of D King and his men, and could not turn over. Start the attack. A loud shout rang out from the top of the enemy's head. Then a large number of enemies emerged on both sides of the road, attacking their completely defenseless heads and backs. A large number of arrows covered the hills on both sides of the road, and the roar of artillery also rang out. There is an ambush. The enemy is above. After being ambushed by the Xia army, the enemy army was in chaos for the first time. But then, what are you panicking about? Line up for defense. There are not many enemies. The enemy knight shouted loudly, after deflecting an arrow from a bow. This army is indeed an elite army. After a period of chaos, it quickly gathered again, to form several circular defensive formations. Apart from the artillery attacks, arrows could not cause much damage to these enemy troops in a circular formation with good weapons and equipment. D King stood on the top of the hill, looking at these enemy formations, that looked like turtles, and frowned again. Although he received intelligence that this was an elite force, he did not expect it to be so elite. It was completely different from the previous enemy forces that were numerous, but completely a mob. Whether it was weapons and equipment or the will to fight, this 10,000 strong enemy force could be said to be the most elite army that the Xia Kingdom had encountered. But then D King's eyes turned cold and he ordered, move the artillery forward. The whole army pressed forward. He did not believe that any more elite army could be more elite than the Xia Kingdom's army. Although the current ambush did not confuse the enemy for long, it was better to fight hand to hand than to let these elite enemy troops enter the city. Chapter 174. Two sides confronted. Under the protection of the heavy shield soldier's solid shield, the artillery moved to the front of the battle line, ready to fire directly. Because the hills on both sides of the road are not very high or steep, the ambush distance is not too far. As a result, the artillery moved to the front of the battle line, only 200 meters away from the enemy. At this distance, it is also within the attack range of the enemy's bows and arrows, so the coordinated combat of the infantry is required. The artillery is close to the enemy, and shotgun is the best weapon. No matter what kind of defense formation, as long as it is not in a high wall, shields and armor alone cannot defend against the attack of small projectiles. The navy is equipped with grapeshot, and the difference from shotgun is the size of the shells fired. Because grapeshot is used to attack enemy ships, the scattered projectiles are made larger, so that they can attack farther, and have stronger armor-piercing ability. Shotguns are equipped with infantry, and they fire some small projectiles, with more quantity and a wider attack surface, but the range is closer. In short, both shotgun and grapeshot are a kind of scattered shells used by artillery for surface strikes, ignoring the different specifications of the scattered projectiles. Now the field artillery advancing the enemy's army is all filled with shotgun shells, which will let the enemy know that the era of fighting with only physical bodies is over. Fire. With an order, all the artillery fired the filled shells. With a boom, the sound of the artillery echoed between the two mountains and spread far away. The shields in the front row of the enemy were all blown away, revealing other soldiers with weak defenses behind. Then the long-range infantry of the Xia Kingdom had been waiting for a long time, and a rain of arrows hit the enemy's defense loopholes, causing another batch of enemies to fall. The enemy is not just taking a beating without fighting back, not to mention that they still have at least 7,000 or 8,000 troops, which is still more than the troops of the Xia Kingdom. Archers, attack the enemy's fire-breathing weapons. Shield warriors, go forward to fill the gaps in defense. Spear warriors, follow shield warriors. Axe warriors, heavy sword warriors, follow up. All troops, counterattack, charge, counterattack. The enemy commander was not a fool. After seeing the power of the Xia Kingdom's artillery, he also launched a counterattack. Heavy shield soldiers focus on protecting the artillery. Sword and shield soldiers, go forward to defend. Spearmen, line up at the back. Heavy infantry, prepare to charge. Strong crossbowmen, archers, step up the attack. Crossbowmen, prepare to defend and counterattack. Speed up the filling of artillery. Deaking saw the enemy's counterattack and responded immediately. In less than a few seconds, the second round of shotgun shells was fired, and a large number of enemies in the charge disappeared in an instant. But the enemy behind was still charging, and did not stop, because of the miserable situation of their comrades in front. Because they knew that, if they did not quickly destroy the enemy's large fire-breathing tubes, their losses would be greater. So the soldiers of the Xia Kingdom watched the scene where the enemy rushed up even at the cost of a large number of losses. Seeing that the enemy was less than 100 meters away from them, they could see the enemy's ferocious appearance clearly. Deaking gave the order to counterattack. Heavy infantry charge the enemy formation. Crossbowmen advance the shield wall and shoot. Strong crossbowmen and archers suppress the enemy archers. The heavy infantry wore full body armor, a helmet with a visor on their heads, holding halberds in both hands, and two swords on their waists. They lined up in a neat line, and launched a counterattack against the charging enemy. Then the crossbowmen came from the back of the battle formation to the front of the sword and shield soldiers, and started a continuous attack on the enemy within the range, until the two spare crossbow arrow boxes on their bodies were all used up, and then they returned to the back of the battle formation. Each crossbowman had two spare crossbow arrow boxes, and counting the preloaded crossbow arrow box, there were a total of 30 crossbow arrows. After a wave of explosive shooting, except for the defensive enemy troops who could still stand, all the others were shot and fell to the ground, making the area within 100 meters in front of the battle formation seem like a rice field planted with crossbow arrows. When the crossbowmen set up a shield wall in front of the crossbowmen, the strong crossbowmen and archers had already suppressed the enemy archers, so that the enemy's long-range attacks could not cause damage to their own soldiers. The heavy infantry counterattacked and started close combat with the enemy troops who still had the strength to fight. These heavy infantrymen, armed to the teeth, held the halberds in both hands and chopped at the enemy, swinging away the enemy's shields, and then stabbed again, and the sharp blade of the halberd pierced into the enemy's chest. If the halberd was damaged or knocked to the ground, the heavy infantry would draw the sword at his waist, one sword in each hand, and turn into a human meat grinder on the battlefield. In less than an hour and a quarter, this wave of enemy counterattacks was repelled, but the heavy infantry did not return, but waited in place. This is because the other Xia soldiers behind also rushed down. Because the enemy was sandwiched on the road by the Xia soldiers from both sides, the enemy's counterattack was also carried out on both sides. Moreover, the enemy's counterattack was repelled by the Xia soldiers. After losing a large number of troops, the number of enemies was not much. So Deaking ordered the whole army to press down on the enemy troops who were defending the road. According to Lusu's estimation, the enemy lost at least 2,000 to 3,000 troops after this counterattack. In addition, the reason why Deking ordered the whole army to advance was that the cavalry led by Zhang Wei also arrived. Cavalry charge. Zhang Wei heard the sound of artillery behind the bend from a distance. After rushing through the bend, he looked at the two armies fighting fiercely and gave the order to charge. The booming cavalry charge caused another commotion in the enemy. They would face a three-sided attack. Seeing that the defeat was inevitable, the enemy commander gave the order to break out. All troops, the first squadron will be responsible for the rear guard, and the rest of you will all break out towards the fortress. The knight's order caused the army in the front to be in chaos. The other armies all launched a desperate charge in the direction they came from, because this was their hope of survival. Order, all troops attack. Deking's order was much simpler. When the enemy broke out, all he had to do was to leave as many enemies as possible. The cavalry battle formation led by the heavy cavalry launched an attack on the enemy army formation that was beginning to become chaotic. After a while of people and horses falling to the ground, the cavalry battle formation was like a sharp knife cutting tofu, and on the narrow road, it divided the enemy army into two halves. Lu Su and Deking stood on a hilltop, looking at the battlefield below. Lu Su sighed, it would be great if the open space here was wide enough. Deking also looked at the battlefield below where the outcome had already been decided, and said without turning his head, how can we take advantage of all the good things in the world? Yes. It's not bad to have such a result in such a short time. Lu Su nodded, stroked his beard, and sighed. There was nothing wrong with what Lu Su said, because the entire plan, from formulation to execution, took less than 3 days at most. Chapter 175. Capture of the fortress. The ambush ended quickly, and the number of enemy troops that escaped was less than 3 layers, which was also due to this narrow terrain. General, we should pursue the victory and seize the northern pass, and then we can beat the enemy with a closed door. Lu Su looked at the fleeing enemy and immediately suggested. When formulating this action plan, Deking, Lu Su, Zhang Wei and others had reserved several plans, one of which was to seize the northern pass. Lu Su's suggestion was just what Deking wanted, and Deking immediately ordered, okay, order the whole army to pursue. As for pursuit, it is completely the forte of cavalry. They will make the enemy feel the despair that they can't escape, no matter how they try. When the fast-moving cavalry pursues the enemy has no other way except to survive again and again. Otherwise, the cavalry will use their powerful mobility and impact to let the enemy know what it means to have nowhere to escape. However, even if troops are sent to cover the rear again and again, it is just a way to quench thirst with poison, unless the other side has reinforcement. At this time, Ammon ordered another troop to cover the rear. Counting the first team, this was the 5th troop he had sent out to cover the rear. But each time, they didn't have to wait long. The strange cavalry that made them tremble with fear would soon catch up, especially the heavy cavalry and the enemy cavalry that was fully armored, which made them even more terrified. Every time this small number of heavy cavalry charged, Ammon's men suffered heavy losses. You know, his men were the most elite troops in the entire south of the Hatan Tauhe Mountains. Even the Boenters of the Boenter could not compare with them. Ammon was given the title of Guardian Knight by the Lord because he was responsible for guarding the Hatan Tauhe fortress for many years and protecting the Shangdao territory from harassment by the powerful territories outside the northern fortress. But now, he had a hunch that this war might not be that simple. Since Ammon received the Lord's support order, he led all the elite troops of the fortress to support. What he didn't expect was that after more than 3 days of marching, he was about to reach the city where the Lord was, and he was immediately ambushed by the enemy. Fortunately, his soldiers were all elite and well equipped. Even ordinary spearmen had a piece of leather armor to protect their chests, so the loss was still within an acceptable range. Ammon also saw the legendary weapon that sounded like thunder and could launch explosive iron balls. Of course, he couldn't let the enemy go on like this. He immediately asked the soldiers to launch a counterattack, ready to destroy or capture the enemy's weapons. But the following battle shocked him. Whether it was the enemy army that advanced and retreated in an orderly manner and obeyed orders, or the enemy general's grasp of the opportunity, they all shocked him. He had never seen such an army before, especially the enemy's heavy infantry in iron armor, whose combat effectiveness was extremely strong. After forming a battle formation, the elite warriors that he had always been proud of found it difficult to counterattack, and those who tried to force their way in would be killed. Seeing that the counterattack ended in failure, Ammon had no choice but to break out after losing many soldiers. But before he could give the order to break out, the enemy's cavalry arrived and hit him hard. Finally, under the three-sided attack, his soldiers were decreasing at a visible speed. He decisively ordered a breakout in the direction of the fortress. After Ammon led the few remaining soldiers to break out successfully, the cavalry behind them actually cut through the entire road, caught up, and launched a pursuit against them. Guardian Knight. The Hatanteohe fortress is ahead. We are almost there. An officer beside him reported to the dejected Ammon. Ammon heard the words of his officers, raised his head, looked at this majestic fortress between the two mountains, and felt very close. He had lived in this place since he was a child. Look, go into the city quickly. The cavalry behind is probably going to catch up again. Ammon cheered up and ordered his officers. Yes, Lord Guardian Knight. After receiving the order, the officer went to organize the few soldiers to enter the city. Ammon looked at the few soldiers left behind him and roughly counted them. There were only about 1,000 soldiers who could return to the fortress safely, which was only about 1/10 of the number when the troops were sent out. This made him very frightened and sad, and there was a trace of fear and despair from the bottom of his heart. Ammon was respected by his subordinates because he was different from other dignitaries in one aspect, that is, he attached great importance to his subordinates as soldiers, and did not think that these soldiers were worthless consumables. This may be related to his experience, or perhaps it was related to the fact that all his subordinates were elites. In any case, he felt sad for those soldiers who did not return, and was also frightened by this defeat. Hey! Ammon stood on the wall of the fortress, sighed deeply at the cavalry chasing from a distance, and gave a helpless order. Send someone to ask for help. If this order for help was not a last resort, he really didn't want to issue it. After all, it was still embarrassing for him to let his old opponent of decades come to support him. Before the support, Ammon knew that this war was a war to protect the Continental Convention and to conquer the new territory that had emerged in the south and destroyed the convention, so he was not afraid that the old opponents in the north would not come to support. It's just that he didn't know whether he could still hold on until the day when the support arrived. Order all the young and strong civilians in the fortress to go up to the city wall for defense. Also, prepare to demolish the houses. Order. The whole army attacks. Deaking saw the collapsed city wall and decisively ordered the siege. This is the 5th day of the pursuit. The remaining enemies behind have been handed over to the cavalry, led by Zhang Wei to be responsible for cleaning up, who makes the cavalry highly mobile. The infantry also arrived outside the fortress a day ago. After nearly a day of bombardment by field artillery, the enemy was successfully prevented from standing on the top of the city. After that, Deaking sent artillery with gunpowder to the base of the city wall and began to bury the gunpowder. The walls of the invincible fortress in the eyes of the enemy were destroyed in a tremor, and countless enemy troops were crushed by the way. Following Deaking's order to attack, the first to enter the city were the heavy infantry lined up in front. This fortress in the eyes of the enemy has two walls, one in the front and one in the south. The wall facing the mountains in the north is extremely tall and strong, even taller than the wall of Shianqian Pass, but it does not have the complete city defense facilities of Shianqian Pass. The wall facing Shangdao City in the south is not very strong, just an ordinary wall. According to the information obtained by Chenping, it is said that there was no wall in the south before, but since the mercenaries attacked the fortress, this preventive wall was built. But no matter what, this fortress has now fallen into the control of the Xia Kingdom. Report to the general. This pass has been captured by our army, and the garrisoned enemy troops have all been killed. After Lu Su integrated the battlefield intelligence, he reported to Deaking. As for why the enemy was killed, it was because the Xia Kingdom did not accept prisoners in this war. Well, very good. Drive out the civilians from the pass to prevent any accidents. Deaking stood on the tall wall in the north of the pass, looking at the vast world outside the pass, and said with his back to Lu Su, "How are our casualties?" End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like, Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.